All right. Well, thank you very much for being here. So I would like to remind everybody how this project started, because I think it's important that we might remind ourselves how we got here today. So it was Anna Harris, Ilse and I having chocolate and tea, which we do regularly, thinking that's how we want to teach. We actually don't want to do lecture anymore. We want to do something else. And a couple of weeks later, there was the call for the communists, and I said, shall we? And everybody was in, and we built that project based really on what we wanted to try out in teaching, not based on anything else than us wanting to really create a new experience for ourselves as teachers and for the students as students. Another little anecdote with Carissa, we're now teaching honor students. She's a visiting professor from the US, and well, you can talk to her later, I'll talk again about her. But we were with our honor students, and we asked them what their research smells like, thinking it's going to be really exciting. And all the students said warm computers, dusty books, and library sweat. And we were just like, well, that's not what our research smells like at all. And what are we doing to our students if they think that that's what research smells like? So for us, it was also this big motivation to try and think, okay, how can we change this? How can we change the way we teach? How can we change the way they understand teaching, the way they understand their own learning? So that's how we started, and so we kind of we started with a working definition of senses-based learning, which we've been kind of tweaking for the last 2 years and a half now, to try and see where we get to, and so that's where we're at now. So senses-based learning we see it as a pedagogical methodology for tertiary education, focusing on exploring and developing sensory awareness and skills, as well as critically reflecting on their importance in education, research, and professional practice. If you have feedback, don't hesitate to bring it back. It's a living definition. So what have we been up to? Well, we've been up to lots of stuff, because that was part of that project, was to try out things. And so one of the kind of core things that we did was to develop an elective, an interfaculty elective that we thought would be interesting to mix particularly medical students and art students, and try to actually help them train their senses. So that was kind of like the core course around which we worked. But as we started developing, all of a sudden, we started having courses in every faculties and doing interventions in many other courses. And so this got out of hand, as it often does with those kinds of projects. So just this year, and because I was thinking like, oh yes, I'm going to tell them everything we've done over the last 2 years and a half. Bad idea. They had 25 slides. I thought, okay, that's not going to work. So I've just reduced it to just what happened last year. And just last year, we had 5 think tanks led by students. So the think tank, the idea was to kind of put the students in charge of their sensory learning, and that they came to us with proposals about what they wanted to work on sensory-wise. So we have 5 groups that have worked. Some have even extended their research projects. Some are organizing an event at Maastricht that the date is still to be confirmed, but that should be very exciting. There's a think tank that's been working on mushrooms for a while, and the sound of mushrooms, and that are going to have an exhibition soon. There's students from neurologies that have been working on the impact on learning and well-being of the senses. You have students that have been working on the sensory lab and teaching spaces, what it could look like. Students working on lecture and senses-based learning, so how to make our lectures more interesting in terms of sensory stimuli. So we've done symposiums, so that's our second go. The first one was fun, the second one promises to be just as fun. We've been working on an interfaculty minor proposal. That's an ongoing project, because administration people. I don't know how to update you. Ask me later. We probably don't want to be on camera for that one. But the idea is to create, from the courses that we've developed in other different faculty, an interfaculty minor that would focus on sensory studies, and that would allow students to explore the senses and the topic of the sensory studies from the medical faculty, from biology, from literature and art, etc. So really try to create something that would be a more complete way also of teaching for the students. What else have we done? Course designs, lots of it. So I'm not going to list here all the courses. I'm just going to give you a little samples of courses that have kind of popped up and appeared. One of the things that has kept me busy a lot was that elective, that's proof of concept elective, that's about really training the senses of the students, combining the students from the medical faculty and the art faculty. I'll come back to that course later. Of course, it's my baby, so I love it. It's my, I can talk about it for days, but I will move on. Anna has developed an elective on the art of noticing with the medical faculty also. We have the honors course that me and Carissa have been developing on researching the cultural field using sensory research methods, so making sense of cultural ecosystems, which we're currently teaching and having quite a lot of fun teaching, I have to say. There's been developments for the clinical assessment course by Anke and Andrea. There's been Roy has been developing some things for tropical biology, and they have an art exhibition. You'll see that later. Roy has also developed a course on biological sensory systems, which is awesome, and I really want us to have it taught somehow. But yeah, Arthur is developing a module on the courthouse or prisons and the architecture of justice and how the experience plays a role there. We've developed internships, sensory internships, and that's been a real challenge to conceptualize internship in a different way than a passing of information, but really a passing of body to body. And we have a student called Maastricht University, who was one of the first students of last year's Sharpening Your Senses, that is now currently doing an internship with a film production firm, and kind of so we're developing that kind of and trying to figure out what does those sensory internship actually look like now. We prepared summer schools. Then we've done lots of interventions in existing courses, and I'm not going to list that because there's so many. So, but I just want to put forward one that I think, just to give you an example. So, for example, Anna has done a workshop in the BA Globalization that's called Who Knows, and I'll let her. If you want to know more, you can go and talk to her later. I think it's been quite fun. We've also developed a PhD proposal because we get so much material from this research. Because for each of the courses and for each of the kind of projects that we do pre and post survey with the students, we do ethnographic observation, and we do interviews at the end of the project. So that means we have loads of data and not enough time in the project to do all the data. So we've decided that maybe it's a good idea for Elena to do a PhD. And so, so we're now looking for funding for a PhD. It's now with the Spencer Foundation, which is an American foundation that finances things to do with education. So fingers crossed. Yeah, you can see the people involved have all kind of crossed their fingers. So, facilities. That's an interesting one. I'm very proud to say that at FASOS we now have a senses-based learning cupboard. Yes, I know, it's a bit, we were wanting a lab. Last year we had a box. This year we have a cupboard. I mean, where to from here? But that's already the place that where we see is that people put things in, and then all of a sudden you open the cupboard and you go, what's this? And why is it in there? And how can I use that? So I think it is already doing its job as a kind of a stimulator of teaching creativity. There's a health and well-being room that's developed at the Renwick Library, but that's very much also an in-progress kind of thing. We're not really sure what's going to happen there. Facilities seems to be a difficult topic at UM. And we've also kind of been developing our digital lab, and I will come back to it in a minute, because I think there's a few things in there that I think are particularly interesting for you sitting here today. We've done loads of Teaching the Teachers sessions. We've done CPD workshop, EdLab, Teach Meet, EdLab Education Days, FASOS Teaching and Learning Festival, Research Group Workshop. Elena is doing an Education Day at FPN on the 10th of April. And of course conferences, so I'm heading to Athens to an educational conference to present the results of the project. So this is just this year. the list is endless. But I think, and of course publications that we need to work on, but as I said, the problem with publications is that we need the data before we can actually finish that. So there was a couple of things that I wanted to kind of focus on, because as you can see, it was a bit too much. So you've gotten the kind of big panorama, and now I'm going to focus on a couple of things that I think are really interesting for teachers and for people that are interested in senses-based learning. The first thing is the how to online module that we designed. Because the main question we got from teachers is, but how do I do that? How do I kind of go from my course about, 18th century philosophy to something that's manageable in sensory, or how do I enhance my teaching? So what we've done, if my computer allows, is that on the senses-based learning website / lab / whatever you want to call it, we started gathering already teaching material, and so that was our first step, to gather teaching material, format it in a way that people can use it. But then it's not enough, because when you end up with all that teaching material organized very nicely by kind of curricular intervention, full courses, lesson plans, tools and techniques, it's useful, but it's quite overwhelming. That's what we found when people were using it. So we split it in two things. The first thing is a how-to kind of module, online module, where you have this kind of step-by-step, how do you design it, learning a bit more also about the senses, because we found that very often people that actually want to work on the senses are not necessarily up to date with the research on the senses, so 8 senses that is, and then evaluation, because that's one of the biggest questions we get from teachers is how do we evaluate it? Now we interviewed a whole lot of people to see how they are doing it, so to see different approaches, and we proposed some rubrics that we're using and that are working beautifully in the courses that we teach, and also typologies of learning goals, because that's often also core to this. But then we felt, okay, this is still not good enough. As a teacher, okay, now I know how to, but I don't really know, I still can't really see what I'm doing, right? So we created a design tool, which it's like you're the first ones to see it in public. This is our exclusive launch of the online design tool, which we think works quite well, because you can just go and say, okay, actually this week I want to work on taste with my students, and I would like them to practice, I don't know, what do I want them to practice? Okay, let's say I want them to practice creativity. And then you can submit, and then you get examples of courses that are doing that. So then you can just go in the courses and see how it's done in practice in the course, right? So it's a tool that's really meant for teachers, meaning starting from either the senses or your learning goals, and they can be really diverse goals. And we've kind of, I know that Nicole doesn't like it, but we still kept it from the hardish skills to the softish skills, which we've seen kind of coming through in terms of learning outcome from the courses. And again, mostly surprises.
The visualization is already
it's been improved.
Yeah, it's definitely improved. Yes, it's not continuous.
I'll tell the designer something like the visualization better. But it's to allow us, for example, if you want to work, for example, on devising codes and ways of documenting, if that's what interests you, then you can just really look at that and see really, okay, diary notation, for example, and look at the different courses and how they use sensory maps. Look at how different courses use it. Yeah. So it's really, the idea with it is to be as usable as possible by teachers. Yeah. So that was the senses-based learning. Do I still have a little bit of time? Yes. Because I really want to show you.
7 minutes.
Yeah, well, let's see how crazy we can get into 7 minutes. All right, so we've discussed the how-to module, the design tool, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what's happening in the proof of concept elective this year, because it's the first year that we're mixing the students from the medical faculty and the arts faculty, and this is a lot of fun. It's gotten, you can see the people that were there last week, we're all giggling, and we've been kind of, having some really nice experiments with the students. So for example, just yesterday, no, the day before yesterday, they were practicing proprioception and Maris, and so they were working with homemade puppets and as a team, and of course this ended up as Fight Club and dance moves, and it was really fun, and they really learned a lot about teamwork and learned a lot about how body moves and the synchronization of the different parts of the body. So it was working really, really quite well.
Okay, so welcome at SBE. I'm Wim, so I'm not Therese, that's Therese, just for the records. I'm a professor in educational research at the School of Economics, and Therese is...
I'm an assistant professor, and I've been a long-term colleague of Wim, decennia apparently.
Yeah, and you can see the difference between us. She is tall, I'm taller. I'm young, she is younger, and we're going to have a presentation on making learning stick, on learning experiences, and you may wonder how did we get into all of this. It's basically that a lot of our teaching takes place through experience. So how do people experience certain things, certain phenomena, and such that they get engaged and immersed in understanding very abstract contents. So, Therese, maybe you want to start?
Yes, so one of the things we noticed was that to really get people involved and engaged in experiences that we try to provide for them as ways of learning, that it's very important for those experiences to be as realistic as possible. And that means it has to involve the senses that they would engage with if they come to practice and they would encounter similar experiences, so that it feels as familiar as possible and that they have already a concept of what to do in those moments. So what we're going to show you is a set of either 2 or 3, depending on the timing, ways in which we have created learning experiences for students as well as for professionals that try to engage as many realistic senses as possible, and how we facilitated learning from these experiences. Because just giving the experience is unlikely to be enough. We also want to leverage the experience by making sure people are reflecting, they're exchanging views, they engage in debate. So we want to share some best practices, how we have experienced how it may work. But we actually want to start with a question for you. We would like to give you about 2 minutes to think about, and you may talk to each other, what is your most memorable learning experience? This can be education, school, university. This can also be something at work, right? We always learn all the time, thank God. So think of an experience that really stuck with you and try to come up with, okay, why did it stick? What made it so effective for me? And this could be the type of experience, the senses that were involved, the relevance that it had for you at the time. So take 2 minutes, you may turn and talk to each other, and then we're curious to hear about your experiences.
So, yeah, sorry, yeah.
All right, I'm sure there's a lot more to say about why learning sticks. I'm curious to hear about the first things that came up for you. You were having a really nice discussion, I could see. Are you comfortable sharing?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I told them about. I was thinking about my childhood, but I thought no. There was one point when I was in my 20s and I went to therapy, and my therapist was walking towards me, and he said, "Say stop when you feel comfortable, when we are coming up close." And I was like, "No, come." But I feel my body was doing other kind of stuff. But I said, yeah, and then it really, I felt really, I learned a lot about my body's telling me everything. So, and also keeping someone's body, other body, for a comfortable distance, and also express that a bit more. So, but first the feeling of the sensing, the senses in the body.
Reading your own body and what it tells you.
Yeah.
That's a really, really nice example. Thank you for sharing. I think that's something that, we can feel how it may have felt. Thank you. Do we have other examples, maybe 1 or 2 more, of moments that made a difference?
I learn a good deal when I'm ashamed. I used to study the work of Emmanuel Levinas, who's a Jewish French language philosopher, and there was a moment when a journalist asked Levinas about the suffering of the Palestine people. And Levinas didn't give an answer at all. He said nothing. So I thought there's something here. I should explore this. So I was discussing this with my supervisor, and he didn't say anything either. So he returned the point to me as if the way he put it was, this is a piece of gossip. There's nothing to be learned here. Levinas's ethical thought is clear enough. Obviously, the suffering of the Palestine people is a relevant factor to consider. And the journalist was simply pressing him on his loyalties with the Jewish people, his people, trying to find a piece of gossip. And I was taken by that. So I felt very ashamed. And that helped me learn, I think, I hope.
Well, I may quote you, right?
Yeah.
It's just semi-awkward. One of the things that Wim keeps quoting to our students is that learning hurts. Sometimes the memory or the experiences that really make an impact on you are the ones that are uncomfortable. And the things that challenge how you have been thinking or how you expect things around you to work. And when that is disconfirmed, that is when our brain is really switched on. And shame is one of the most powerful social emotions that we have, right? It's about being included, excluded, that's so fundamental to us that I think that would qualify as hurt.
Shame tends to be accurate, right? It's not, shame tends to be accurate. It doesn't often happen that I feel that I ought not to feel ashamed. No, it's always on point.
Thank you for sharing. Do we have maybe a third example illustrating something different? So we have a physical experience, we have an emotional experience.
I have an example of just sense that I remember. My sensory things were involved as in school when our teacher, chemistry teacher, would be bringing this organic substance. I had to Google how it's called, but still in English, I mean, ethanol. Doesn't matter, but she was saying like, yeah. So she would bring this pulp to us and let us smell, and it smelled like spoiled eggs. So, but till now I remember the smell and I remember the substance. So it made a very clear connection.
Yeah, and it sticks even now.
Yeah,
Decennia later, right? It's just
it's still smell it, right? Yeah.
All right. So we have an experience of physical sense. Of I experience something my body is telling me in response to a situation. I hear input and other people discussing, and it evokes a very strong emotion in me. My senses are overwhelmed by something unexpected and unpleasant, and your body is really good with, okay, we don't want that again, so let's remember to make sure we don't get into the vicinity of it again, right? So we see that senses and experience, especially if they're emotional and they mean something to you, that they can be very powerful mechanisms for learning. So over the years that we've worked together, we've tried to leverage those elements that are maybe not always comfortable, but that are meaningful and provide you with input that makes you think, in order to help our students prepare for different challenging situations. So think about team decision making, being overwhelmed in your senses and still having to coordinate and to come to a good decision together. For professionals, we've done that, dealing with complexity, dealing with time pressure, having to negotiate across hierarchical boundaries, all things that we initially find difficult. The more we are overwhelmed, the more we fall back to who we really truly are and what our instinctive responses are. Knowing those is really powerful and then preparing for having similar experiences in the future. So to give you a little bit of an insight on more of the research and our teaching approach, the fundamentals behind that. For us, the most important thing is that when we design teaching activities or experiences, also for professionals, we want to make sure that we meet 3 basic human needs. The first one is the need for autonomy. Most people have a drive to have some level of control over how things are being done, right? We may have to agree on a common goal, but if I have the autonomy to decide how I'm going to get there, I will feel a lot more ownership. Competence means that it's really important to notice at some point that I'm making progress, that what I'm learning is useful, that I'm mastering what is there, and that I'm ready to apply it. And the third one is relatedness. That means by engaging in a certain activity, it connects me to people that are meaningful for me. I want to be part of that community. I enjoy going to class because I see Emily there and I get a lot of energy from her. Or I see Elena and I know she's really passionate about the topic. That connects me to the experience. And by meeting those 3 needs, that results in intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation means we can engage in learning in a more sustainable way, in a more healthy way, because it is meaningful for us, because we have control, because it connects us to people that we feel are important to us. Then, Wim, one of your favorite books.
Yeah, so think about a situation we're facing. We are teaching a course on cognition, judgment, and decision making, which is basically very boring. Because you read stuff and think, oh yeah, okay, what do I need to memorize for knowledge, what's on the exam, that kind of stuff, and we wanted to change the situation. And in business, they do a lot of research on how can I communicate my message? When does it stick to people? And a turning point in my teaching career was when I got this book, recommended by my wife, Made to Think. And this book is a €10 book. I highly recommend to buy the book because it starts as follows. There's a business traveler. And the business traveler, after having a rough night, he wakes up lying in the bathtub. And in his bathtub, when he's slowly waking up, thinking, where am I? What am I doing in this bathtub? It's filled with ice cubicles. And there's a small yellow pad saying, don't move. Call 911. And he sees a phone lying next to the bathtub. I think, well, okay. Since we're still a little bit groggy, let's do it. Let's follow the instructions. And he gives a call to 911. And dispatch says, Sir, tell us. How can we help you? Well, I'm lying here in a bathtub filled with ice cubicles. And there's a sign saying, call 911. Oh, it's you. Don't move, sir. Don't move. Just wait. We will know. Which hotel are you in? Okay, yeah, we know the place. Yeah, we'll come. 5 minutes from now. Don't move, sir. And while he's waiting, he thinks, how does she know? And he's in this hotel, in his bathtub, his ice cubicles. And he starts to remember, hey, wait, where's this blonde girl? I had a rough night with this blonde girl, yes. Where is she? And wait, and he starts feeling there's something in my bag. There's a little tube coming out of his bag. Gee, there are 2 tubes coming out of his bag. And he remembers he had a drink with a blonde girl, and he had a beautiful evening, and they ended up in his hotel room. Then he passed out, or whatever, and nothing happens. And yeah, that's what it is. So at that moment when he realizes, there must have been something horribly wrong, the fire brigade gets into the room, the ambulance gets in, and they say, sir, don't move. Did you meet this blonde girl? Yes. Okay, we will take care of you. We will bring you to the hospital because they took your kidneys out and probably already sold on the black market. And that's how the book starts. And the book starts analyzing why business traveler, all business traveler, the frequent business traveler in the world know that story. You know why? Because business travelers stay in hotels. They know, this is a moment for, let's say, meeting some interesting other people. And they start unraveling why that story sticks to the minds of business travelers. And they come to the conclusion that what people memorize are stories which are recognizable, which could have happened to you. And they also analyze that when you try to teach abstract principles, we are doing the opposite from telling stories. And throughout the book, they analyze what you can do to create PowerPoints such that students remember your PowerPoint. So the first lesson is don't teach abstract principles unless, and they say it's like building a house, and you start with the roof first and then you build building the walls. And the second rule they explain is stories are like flight simulators for the brain. Now there's a connection between the second sentence over there because in a couple of seconds we will tell you what we are teaching in our course is we use flight simulators in our course as a tool to help students to understand the complexity of decision making in teams. So that's one. And then the book says, there are 6 principles for teaching such that you have success in your teaching, and they come up with a list of principles. It's all obvious for you, but the sticking thing in it is it's about emotions. The book says, and it's written by business researchers who normally think in terms of economics, and where's the money coming from? They say it's all about the emotional experience you're having, and that's about how people get to care about the things you are discussing. And they also say stories are motivating people to act. So it gets a little bit to the story we were just sharing a couple of seconds ago. And they would also say simulation is important because it's the knowledge on how to act, and inspiration is the motivation, that makes you act. And in this book, then once they go there, they refer to another book, Great at Work, which I can also highly recommend to you. And they analyze the question, why is it that some people are so passionate about what they do that they are such high performers around you, and those people are here today, and the others are not here. And the book comes to the conclusion, basically it's all about two dimensions in your work. One is the purpose in your work. You know, are you what you are doing? Does it contribute to society or a bigger thing? And the passionate with the way you're doing. And since we are the business schools, they love 2x2 designs. They would say, if you're a low, so low on purpose and low on passion, you know, those are the low performance areas. They're below the 10th percentile in that kind of study. And if you are a high-low, so high purpose but a low passion, you're a little bit above the average. That's fine. And if you're a low-high, so low on purpose, yet you're very passionate, basically you're frustrated, yet you're doing the job. Yeah? And then when you're a high, you get the most out of people. And then the book analyzes why some companies achieve a high level of purpose and a high level of passion, while others don't, and what's the difference in their financial and market performance. Okay, so take that as a starting point. And that's the only moment here when we will show you you're at the business school now, you're a guest, be welcome. That's the kind of stuff we did. Okay, so keep that in mind. Then we are going to learning through moments that matters. And I think you want to say something about it.
Yes.
Because you were one of my first victims in my class.
Very true, yes. So we're going to walk you through the favorite day of the year for us in terms of education. This is not just us, but our colleagues looking forward to this all year. And this is when we put our students into a flight simulator, when we talk about the topic of team learning and team judgment and decision making. As you can imagine, pilots are faced with a very complex task. They have to interpret information, and then together they have to come to a conclusion. And if we can make our students read about it, and then they can imagine, it's probably difficult, but they don't know what it feels like. They don't know what it means to be overwhelmed by audio information, by visual information, having to coordinate, being observed. Like, it's a lot. So our educational setting is, we are talking about master students, and it's a required course. So all students in our own master's program will go through this course. It has the very boring name, Theories and Models of Learning, but we make it fun. Then the learning objective that we address with the flight simulation is understanding and applying theories of individual and team learning, specifically the team learning part. So it's understanding the vocabulary, having the words, right, to describe what is happening, exactly the same goal, and being able to understand how does team learning really work and feeling it. We have between 20 and 50 students each year, so we do this in batches of tutorial groups, so they are already familiar with each other at the moment when we run the simulation. They've been together for 5 weeks. So we've worked very hard on building trust and psychological safety. We introduce very clearly why we do the simulation. And the objective for us is to use the flight simulator to have them experience what team learning feels like and the conditions that are required for you to take into account when it comes to making decisions. Any questions at this point in time before we go more into detail?
I was curious about the former slide, with the boxes that talked about performance.
Yes.
So, is the idea that people perform better when they are passionate about what they're doing, and knowing that what they do means a great deal to society?
The idea is that you need to be passionate,
yeah,
and there needs to be a high purpose in the work. And the thing is, in that kind of research, is that people are not born as passionate people. They are made or created or shaped by the work environment to become passionate in what they do. So that raises the question, what could companies do to make people passionate about the things they do, knowing that there's a certain purpose of the company. And then you get the highest performance. And that's, Teresa has done studies on it as well, and it shows organizational culture explains substantially more of the performance of the firm than we would ever have expected. Yeah. That's the same here. Okay? Good.
My guess would have been that there are people who perform very highly, not contributing very much at all.
No, that research would say...
In the short term, maybe.
Yeah.
In the very short term, maybe. If you think, I can earn a lot of money by being in this job, usually doesn't stick for a long time.
Uh-huh.
except for a small minority. So there's always variance, obviously. But long term, if you're missing purpose, then it's going to be very difficult. So I did a business degree. A lot of my friends, they studied finance. Everybody went into banking. It was 2010, so we had this wonderful financial crisis, right? They earned half of what they thought they would earn. Huge frustration. One of them is a teacher now. One has an ice cream truck. We have 2 people that have switched completely, and they're now working in sustainability advising. So they were in the field, said, yeah, but beyond money, I don't see it. And they switched. And now they have purpose and passion.
Okay. So the thing is that it relates when you work at a business school. We talked to our colleagues from the Department of Economics. They would say people perform depending on the bonus they get. Yes, and research would demonstrate, yes, that's true, but it's true on the short term. And the long term it isn't.
Okay.
And our work is, if the work environment has a culture where people don't feel like they belong, and they have a feeling that they contribute to whatever they're doing, performance in the end will drop. Which is not a very nice message for companies, because it's very difficult to create that kind of working culture. Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay. And this, by the way, there's another connection. Grading students, as a driver of performance, works on the short run but not on the long run. Same kind of research. Okay, so keep that in mind. But and when we talk about the flight zone, you were saying this is one of the highlights what we do. So at that point, they have read, this is about the 3rd or 4th week in the course, they have read hundreds of pages on how the brain works, how people make decisions, what's cognitive architecture, how teams work together, what does leadership mean, what does complexity mean. And then we put them in a situation where they are literally overwhelmed by all the instruments in the cockpit, where there's air traffic control constantly talking to them, where they need to coordinate between the first officer and the captain. Yeah? That's the situation, and they know that I'm a 737 pilot on a simulator. So So during weekends I make flights from Amsterdam to Norway and around, and that takes me hours, and I need to train and practice. I got all my certificates to do so on a simulator. Yeah, so they know that guy, is pretty serious about whatever we are going to talk about. So they feel already a little bit like stressed up and so on. So that's the situation they face, and they've read hundreds of pages on team decision making and so forth. That's the situation they face. Okay, so now you want to talk.
So, when you think of trying to anticipate, right? We want to put in experience into our course. We want to find a way to make it more practical, to make it stick, to make it experienceable. Of course, you go through a planning phase and you try to anticipate different things that happen. So we would like to take you along in a very short exercise to think along with us, back to when we started using the flight simulator. What are possible challenges that you anticipate? And we would like to split you into 4 groups so that you have a few people to talk to. It's much easier. So could I ask this group, Anna, including you with this corner, to anticipate what are challenges for us, right? We are going to guide the students in this experience. What are things that we have to be aware of so that that experience is actually effective for learning? Yes? All right, then this slice over here. What are the challenges that you would anticipate the students might be facing? And Eva, you know a little bit because you've been there. Yes. So you can share some of your experiences from the time. What might be challenging for students? Of course, some of them are really excited and they can't wait to fly, but others not so much. So try to think of what should we anticipate from the student side so that we can make this an effective, not necessarily only fun experience, but that the discomfort is in a way that it's still suitable for them. All right, and then we have, let's do you as well as you, because assessment is a big thing, right? How can we assess what the students are doing in the simulation? And don't think about grading. It's not about grading, but it's about how do we help them reflect? How do we provide feedback? Who should be providing feedback? When is a good moment to reflect, right? Should this be something in the beginning, at the end, in between? What are ways in which we can encourage learning as they go through this experience? Yes, and then we have team 1 and team 2, is that okay? All right, and then we have a final team over here. We would like to challenge you to think of general pitfalls, things that we have to be aware of that might go wrong, but also preconditions that have to be in place for this experience to work. Yes? We give you about 5 to 6 minutes. Good luck. We're curious. Wait, just a second. There's a question.
I don't know, maybe that's just me. I have no experience with flight simulators. I would have thought it's a great tool to have individuals test their sort of functioning in a high-stress environment. I don't know where the team aspect comes in.
All right. So we have a pilot and a co-pilot, and we make them dependent on each other. So that means we have the pilot who's able to steer left, right, up, down, but they don't have capacity to pay attention to what air traffic control is saying. So the co-pilot is tasked with listening, making sense, and instructing the pilot, and they can push the gas or the brake. And in order, if you go up, you have to increase the gas, otherwise you fall down, right? If you go down and you don't brake, then you slam into the ground. So you have to navigate together.
Mm-hmm.
So we make them
has only half
independent.
of the... Yeah.
Exactly. You can fly together, but everybody's doing half of the task.
Mhm.
Thank you for
So
asking.
2 people.
Two
Okay,
people.
thank you.
Yes, thank you for asking. All right, in the interest of time, I'm curious to hear about your thoughts and your ideas and maybe more questions. So I would like to start with, surprise, surprise, the teacher group, of course. What are maybe 2 or 3 things that you came up with that you think are really important to consider for teachers before implementing such an experience?
A little bit more, but
That's okay.
now, first of all, psychological safety, that everybody's safe because you go out of the box,
Mm-hmm.
so that is important, and also to deal with before. So if they experience maybe a bad flight, but also maybe during what they experience, as you said, okay, when they were shouting at you, the co-pilot is constantly shouting, what does it do, for example, with the pilot? Then there was also one, I can relate also very well to it myself. Can we work with the technology as a teacher? And are we, that is related to it, so can we work with the technology and are we able to give understandable instructions?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you can make a manual, but information doesn't necessarily mean understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Then also finding the right elements for, and that is then learning, playfulness, theory and reflection. You said they have a lot of theoretical background. Maybe they have that in their minds. Oh, I have to behave like this when I'm a co-pilot. But also the playfulness in there, the reflection and the learning. So how can we instruct them and let them know and have it afterwards? Mm-hmm. Finally, they're aware as well that sometimes it's hard to articulate even these things, but how will they be able to articulate their learning?
Yeah, this goes back to having the right words, right?
Because they may experience something completely different than elsewhere, and explaining a model as we student is maybe easy or not depending on the model, but explaining the experience as such, but does something with you as a person might be hard to articulate. How can we help them?
Yeah.
Or assist them, support them?
Yeah, excellent points. Thank you so much. Now, the other side of the coin, the student perspective.
Yes, so I made the notes. Yeah, we mentioned talking the same language. Yeah, like the same as, so what do you tell each other and how long or short are the messages? I mean, they should be short, we suppose at least, because you don't have a lot of time. So again, language, but differently. Yeah, students might be stressed because we heard also that they are kind of performing in front of the rest of the class.
Mm-hmm.
So that relates partly to the sort of psychological safety, I guess. The co-pilot has this headset on, we thought. The pilot itself, not. But but putting on a headset might feel different for different people. If you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, that may have an influence for the student. So what type of student are you? Yeah, there might be people who are afraid of heights, and you are kind of in a plane. At least it will feel as if you are in the plane. So. Yeah, and then we thought about which of the senses students would actually be using, because you hear and you see obviously, but also you touch stuff, because you have to, the throttle is probably just push and pull, but if you want to put more gas or less, that will affect the plane a lot. And the proprioception of you versus the rest of the space will also be relevant. And that was what we came up with in that time frame.
That's a really, really not only clear list, but I really like that you took into account that different students may process the information differently that we're giving to them, and that they may have a different personal starting point, right? That's something that we have seen in different variations. We show you some examples, but this turned out to be really critical. So thank you for coming up with it so early already. Good. Then for assessment, let's start with group 1, and then group 2, you can add if there's anything else or you saw things differently. Is that all right?
Sure.
Good. Then what should we do? How do we leverage learning?
Well, we thought that very important element of learning for them is this reflection that they need to perform first of all by themselves. We were thinking that there should be the good timing for the reflection as well, because maybe right after the simulation they may be too emotional, they may have experienced stress, so it would be good to have different points for reflection there. We also were thinking that maybe they have different roles, and maybe it would be a good idea for them to experience both roles to understand better of what is going on and to better reflect on it. Another thing, we were talking about that if they reflect, can they have a second try to see how it's working? So they have this autonomy of designing those rules and understanding before they get any external feedback of how they performed or what they could do. So give them this practice. And also I think it's probably important to provide some kind of guiding points on what to reflect for them, so that they it would structure their reflection and they would make better connections. And then
Yeah, part of the guidance would be like some going back to the emotions. Probably one of the important emotions in these roles is feeling secure with your partner. So quite some emphasis on that, since it is about team building.
Right, so we have to focus on emotions and language, right? How do we talk about it, but also managing those emotions. Good. Thank you very, very much. Do we have additions from team 2?
Yeah, we went about it quite differently. So first we thought about the timing of the evaluation, and we thought they should have a tryout round, then a midway evaluation with prompts, then a real round, then a self-evaluation, and then the stress round that Arthur came up, where something goes wrong in the training, so that they can really put to try what they've tried. So that was that. And in terms of what to evaluate, we thought it would be interesting to evaluate the outcome, so do they crush or not, the group dynamics, the communication in terms of clarity, but also in terms of form, because we think that that's quite important in the teamwork. The leadership potential, because we feel that there's always going to be someone that has to take the lead in that kind of work. The growth, so in response to peer feedback, to self-assessment, but also for what the teacher keeps them in the middle, and stress management. We felt that would be something that would be important to evaluate. So yeah, you see, we were very structured.
Wim, what's your first reaction to the timeline?
Yeah, I thought this is just great.
Disregard for the well-being of the student.
But I think it will return when we're discussing the pitfalls. This is not the way I planned my first workshops. I've simply forgot about it because I was focused on content, and I'm very passionate about it. And you forget that that you went through the kind of experiences you were mentioning and the importance of it. So it took me years, and also thank God Teresa.
We didn't have any of this.
No, you didn't have any. I just put you in a simulator and said, let's go. So for the pitfalls and the educators, I thought, I could have learned a lot from you. So that's also a very important lesson when you think about you are very passionate about them and you want to share with your students that there are too many issues basically you need to decide about. Yeah, okay, so that's my first thought. Yeah, okay.
So then we're going to learn Das Word
for
It hurts for the student and for me. Yeah. And sometimes I felt a little bit what you were saying, shame. I thought, did I do this to my students?
You want some more information?
Okay. So, the pitfalls.
The pitfalls. Well, first of all, we thought of overstimulation and sensory overloads would be a pitfall, which would result in communication breakdown. And we thought also the design of the equipment would be a bit of a pitfall because Roy said that's the average, the seat of the pilot is designed for the average pilot, but people are different sizes, so it doesn't really fit always. So that would be a pitfall. And we thought that a precondition would be trust building, but also a pitfall from that would be too much trust in each other, where in the moment it actually, you get jumbled up and someone makes a mistake and you trusted them and that trust is broken.
You make assumptions
Yeah, exactly.
about what the other might be anticipating.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we also thought of the disability and fears and all of that factor into also.
Okay, that's a lot. So when you take a look at it, you might draw the conclusion, maybe it's better not to do it. Forget about it. It was just a nice idea, just forget about it. Yeah, that's all. Yeah.
Well, good thing you didn't think about all of those things before.
So now that we will come back to this while we're going through.
Yeah, as we show you the design as it is now after 10 plus years of experimenting.
Yeah, okay. So let's give it a try.
Let's give it a try.
Good.
So I was a student, right? And Wim's class, I think we were the second year when we did this.
Yes.
So beforehand, we were informed that in one of the upcoming sessions there will be a flight simulator, and you get to choose if you're going to be a pilot or if you're going to be an observer. No, we weren't allowed to choose. That came later. You assigned us. Yeah.
That was already my first mistake.
So that was
So I said,
definitely
you're
no
the captain.
accommodation for fears or the processing information immediately, right? We were just like thrown in. I was really glad that I was an observer because I was scared to death. The people that ended up flying, they were really enthusiastic about it though. And then we needed, of course, some preparation. So mentally you're being prepared, it's going to happen. You have a little bit of information what it's going to look like. You have the theory, you have the language at least to talk about the behaviors of the processes, the mental states that is there. Not so much the emotion at that point in time. So now we have really professionalized this. We have an interactive module where students walk through the theory of team learning. They get a lot of examples also with videos of flight crews. For people who are afraid of flying, we have alternatives because we noticed that for some people it can be super triggering. And that's not the point, right? They're not learning. So we have alternatives for people who are afraid. So they come in with having knowledge about the theory of preconditions, behaviors, and states. Then people come into class and we split them into two groups. We have the pilots, those are the people that stay with Wim in the classroom, and we have the observers. By now they're allowed to choose themselves. So if they are afraid of sensory overload, if that's something that they have trouble processing, they can choose to have a more passive role. We don't force anyone. Then, in the pilot group, where you can explain a bit how you train them.
So we train them. I give them a 15 minutes workshop on how to fly an airplane. That should do.
15 minutes.
So and it's designed in such a way that I make them aware that everything is about speed, altitude, and heading. I make them aware about the way. Remember, you read about the way you communicate. Remember how it is. I make them aware that once you take off, you get lost immediately. You don't know where. I tell them the importance of navigation. I explain the instrument panel. I also give them a pre-flight, just to get a feel of it. How does the simulator respond to whatever you are doing?
Because if you steer right, for example, you would expect it to go like a bike or a car, right? It turns.
Yeah.
You cannot. You tick it once, and then it will make a turn. You tick back, and it will return. It's a very different way of steering. It feels very disconnected.
Yeah. So it's not like driving a car. And I teach them that the most dangerous thing in aviation is that when your speed is too low, that most times you don't notice when it's happening. That one situation is that's called a stall condition. The stall condition is nose up, and there isn't sufficient power, so you make it climb and you're slowing down, and then what happens is the plane will fall out of the air. It drops down, you don't notice. So there goes an alarm off, and that's called a staller, a buzzer. And the students think, oh, come on, this won't happen to me. And I train them what they are supposed to do in case it happens. That means nose down and full power. And I tell them, there's a famous crash that they probably all know. That's the Air France flying from Brazil to Paris, where this actually happened with an Airbus 330. And more than 300 people died because of the stall. And they didn't notice, it just happens. Yeah? So they get that kind of training. They're a little bit jittery in the beginning. It's real serious stuff. Yeah, yes. And I tell them also about the importance of what the captain does and what the first officer does. So the first officer is the interface with air traffic control, and the captain is not allowed to listen to air traffic control.
We don't use headphones anymore. We used to, but the problem was that then for the observers it was completely unclear what was happening. So now we let the audio play. We have a video for you in a moment so you can see what it looks like in practice. And you hear the talking, but in our experience the pilot is too overwhelmed steering, processing visual information. They rely on their co-pilot. Eva is nodding her head, you've been there. Yeah, there's no capacity anymore to also process the audio, so you have to rely on your co-pilot to do it.
So what typically happens in situations is that the captain is not allowed to listen, yet the captain does. And why? Lesson 1, because they feel responsible. So they listen. And then at that moment something happens in your brain, you can't handle it anymore. You can't listen to air traffic control while they're talking like this, and you need to fly the plane. Your brain just locks up.
And that's exactly the overstimulation, the communication breakdown. And we see this in hilarious ways. So sometimes we have teams who are completely silent, steering into the ocean. Just going straight down, everything's blue, no words spoken, complete shutdown.
Yeah, and they say, we're doing well. And then, look at the view, look at the view.
Okay, you're right, that's it, but clean into the ocean. And another thing we have a lot is that people scream individually at the screen, but there's no overlap in communication. It's just a lot of shouting, a lot of cursing. It's whatever first language you have, that's coming out. People forget about we speak English in class because the emotions are just there. And sometimes you have people that take care of each other. Yeah. And that's an example that we're going to show you, where you see the co-pilot took it on herself to make sure the pilot is all right. She absorbs a lot of the stress and she makes sure the pilot is in the zone where she's able to do it. And this particular team, they were so sweet. So we chose them as a really good example. We also had a few slaps. When the co-pilot gets impatient with the pilot and tries to take over the control, and some of the pilots, they would just slap the hand away. We also had one slap I'll never forget. We had a very matter-of-fact Dutch girl who was the pilot, and we had a very dominant Italian student in the co-pilot role. We made him be co-pilot because we thought it would be a good learning experience. And she eventually gave up listening to him because he was very distracted by the views and that everything was nice. They were flying in the Caribbean. And he just gave up on listening to the instructions. So she thought, you know what, I'm going to do this by myself and you do what you want to do. He noticed that, okay, we're not really communicating. So he sat closer to her and he tried to put his arm around her. Wrong response. Wrong response. So she pushed him away and said, if you want to help, you listen and you shut up. And then he was started to listen. Oh, we need speed 75. We have speed 75. It's fantastic.
So realistically, would the captain have access to the audio of the flight control?
Yes, it's there.
Okay.
In the beginning they try to listen, they soon realize they can't, and then they learn to delegate and to rely on the co-pilot.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there is a very strong trust relationship in the sense of trusting the competence of the other. Let it go. But they are trained in a way, or socialized, or grow up like, but I'm in the captain's role, so I have the final responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we take it super serious.
Yeah. And if you would see the setup of what we do as a flight simulator, how you think we have a real cockpit in my office and so on. Nothing. How a very simple instrument can make you think that it's real. Okay? So those are part of we want to tell a little bit more about
the observers. So what we did then for the observers out of the room, Yeah, anyway. So what we train the observers to do is, one, what do they have to look for in terms of recognizing the concepts that they study theoretically? What does constructive conflict look like? What does co-creation look like? What does reflexivity look like? They know what those things mean. They may not have thought about how it looks and how it sounds, right? How do I recognize that people engage in these behaviors? Is there a way for me to predict how it may look like? Are there different variants depending on who is interacting, right? If I'm super extroverted and Western socialized, then I will show that behavior differently from someone who's been socialized in an East Asian culture, for example. You have the same objective, but you will engage very differently based on who you are and where you come from and what has been expected of you in the past. So we have to be aware of that. The second thing we look at is your task is to give feedback to the pilots, because they fly multiple times so that they can learn. What way can you choose to give the feedback so that it's the most helpful for the pilots? So we make them anticipate. How will the pilots feel? They will feel overstimulated. They will feel stressed, right? They will be, some of them are shaking when they come out of the first session. So how do you reach them? What makes sense? And the students usually come up with, well, first we give them a moment to breathe. And then we ask the pilots to tell us, okay, tell us how it felt for you. So that there's a bit of time for the pilots to calm down and to process, right? Because they may be overstimulated. And then we limit our feedback to just a point or two, where we noticed that at some point you were both quietly steering into the ocean, and we thought that it's probably not because you wanted to do that, but because you were overwhelmed. Maybe it's a good idea for you to talk to each other, to come up with ways how you can prevent that from happening the next time, right? So it's more about giving suggestions how the pilots can find a solution rather than saying you should do those 15 things and then you'll be okay. It's never going to happen. So we want the observers to come to that conclusion by themselves, by putting themselves in the shoes of the pilots. That also means that we talk about the emotions that the pilots are going to have. And the observers have emotions too. We have beautiful pictures. In a second you will see. We talk about, okay, how do you deal with those emotions? So we've had an incident where in the reflection afterwards, one of the pilots got so upset that she didn't come to class for 2 weeks because she felt personally attacked by the feedback that she had gotten. She didn't verbalize in the moment because she was overwhelmed. Otherwise we would have intervened very differently. And she only told us afterwards what it had done to her. And of course that's never the intention. So now we are very explicit about, okay, take into account what are the others feeling? How can you meet them, right, with your feedback? How can you verbalize it in a way that it is very clear what your intentions are? And how do you invite the pilots as well to give you feedback on how you handle the situation? So that has become a very explicit part. So we have the two teams. They've each been trained for 15 to 20 minutes. Wait, you're going up too fast. Exactly, perfect. So we have the first pilot team of 2. They fly a first mission, and it's a simple mission. You are already in the air, the landing strip is in front of you, and you just have to keep straight and go down. That's all you have to do, right? That's already quite challenging, but there's one task, and there's it's a very simple display, so they only have 4 instruments that they have to monitor. That's it. So it's as simple as can be. We have the observers who are sitting and they're looking and they're trying to understand what's happening. The flight is over either with a crash, that's about 90% of the time, or a landing. Sometimes we get a clear crash and it's still counted as a landing by the software. That's always a big cheer. And then the observers kick in, right? And they will ask first the others to reflect the pilots. They will then try to encourage them. And then we give time to the pilots to process the feedback, to reflect together, and to come up with specific things they want to do in the second round of flying to work better together. So it's very much about the timeline that you have already suggested, right? We give them information, we have a trial run, we give them prompts, we give them things to start with, they reflect, and then we have the stress round. We don't call it that. But it's a bit more difficult. This time they have to navigate. If they are doing really well, we have different levels of difficulty here. If they're doing semi-well, they have to fly around and then land. If they're doing really, really well, we let them land in the Caribbean and they have to first find the right island and then go there. And there are multiple airports, they have to find the right one. If they're doing too well, we give them the Alps and we cut out their fuel supply halfway through. So that everybody's in the zone of being challenged enough. Sometimes we get particularly male students who get really competitive and they ask in week 2, which simulator are you using? Now we know they're practicing at home. Because they really look forward. So then, of course, we cut the fuel supply so that the level of challenge is similar for everybody. Right? Also, if you have a lot of gaming experience, you tend to be more familiar with navigating on a screen. So we have some room to make it equal. It's so much fun. So the team you see in the video, they were doing extremely well in their first round. So this is where we cut off the fuel. This is the most difficult one. Observers observe. They give feedback again. The pilots reflect. And then we have a shared reflection. The pilots talk about their experience of receiving feedback, reflecting, having to apply it immediately, so that also the observers receive feedback on how they have been fulfilling their jobs and things that they may have to pay attention to more in the future. So it's a two-way thing. Then we have a debriefing where we share some experiences, like the anecdotes we've been sharing with you, but also we go back to the theory with them. We try to point out, okay, how did you see that behavior? When did that happen? How did that feel? And then the same week we have an aviation safety specialist who comes by. And she tells us about the real stuff. So she does crew resource management training. She's been a flight attendant for 20 years. She's been a trainer for more than 20 years. She's now applying this to a business context so that we get the turn to business as well. Not that we care that much, but the school does. So having them experience it yourself and then talking to someone who has been there and who's training people who are there, it makes a much different impact than you could have just had if you had read about it. Right? It's one day, one tutorial. They have a bit of preparation, everything else happens in the tutorial, and then we round it off with a workshop by our aviation specialist. And then that's that starting point of the unit on team learning.
Okay, so basically what you see is a lot of the things you have been recommended. Nowadays we're doing, but it took us years to get that far. Okay, so we want to show you some photographs, a video.
First, some pitfalls.
Pitfalls, yes.
Just to reflect, right? So we have the need for psychological safety, right? The students, would never do this in week 1 of the course. We want the students to know each other. We want them to feel that it's a bit predictable what everybody's like. We also increase safety by letting the students choose who is flying and who is observing. Some people are not comfortable, and then that's okay. And some people really, they've been training for 3 weeks until they can't wait. They come half an hour earlier, can I already get started? So we account for that. Then the instructions have improved over time, right? For you, the challenge was that you know, and you have to explain to someone who's beginning. For me, the challenge was to make it explicit enough and to have students come up with examples that are explicit enough to spot as they observe and they're stressed as well. So we've developed that over time, and we always ask the students, was this enough? What do you need more emphasis on? And then we calibrate. The stress is a huge thing. So the audio processing, we used to have headsets, but that was overwhelming for the co-pilot because they were listening, they had to talk to someone who wasn't wearing headsets, and the observers couldn't pay attention. So no more headset, and then it takes the pilots a minute to realize, I can't pay attention, it's okay, I have to rely on my co-pilot, it's okay. We also focused on people being afraid or having fears. So we have some people who get overwhelmed visually, not that they have epilepsy, but it's maybe a bit akin to people who are triggered by flashes. For some people, fast movements on the screen are challenging. So we ask them to tell us ahead of time. And then we can give them a different assignment, or we can sit them close to the exit, that if they feel, okay, this is too much, that they can leave the room without disturbing. And for them, that's easier to then also really do that. We had one student who had been in an accident before, and she told me, while our flight special, so she didn't come to the simulator session, which was fine, but she thought she could handle the talk by our safety expert, she couldn't. So within 2 minutes, she had tears streaming down her face, so I took her outside, we took care of her, it was fine. Now we have a trigger warning. Said, look, if this is something that is emotionally difficult for us, let us know ahead of time. We figure out something for you that is not triggering, but that still gives you context for the team learning module, but not this way. We haven't had a student make use of it yet, but at some point I'm sure it will help someone. So this is a lesson that we learned through experience, and we didn't anticipate that might happen. Yeah, so we have multiple turns of flying. We ultimately chose not to do multiple roles because the technical training is quite intricate. So retraining people halfway through would probably cause more confusion. So we skip the multiple roles, but we have multiple turns with reflection interspersing, time for processing, prompted reflection, and then also giving that feedback back at the end. So this is very, 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 very close to ours. We just don't call it the stress round, right? But it is. All right.
Right.
Let's show some pictures.
Okay. So.
Oh yeah, this is just illustrating the
Okay. So look at this. That's flight sim 7. There's me sitting behind the laptop, and we're seeing a screenshot of what they see at that moment. Okay, so I could manipulate the situation if I want to.
This is the second round of flying. They're flying in the Caribbean. They're trying to land on St. Martin. If you are a fan of aviation, that's the videos of people lying at the beach and the plane goes straight over.
And so we are in this setting. We have chosen for two guys. The person on the left over there with the beard, that's the captain. The captain is working with the joystick. And the person on the right is the first officer, is the interface with air traffic control, and uses the power handle. Now think about a situation, you driving the car, there's someone sitting next to you talking all the time, while your GPS is also talking, but that person has the privilege of using the power and the brake. And then you need to find your way in Paris, okay? Well,
Ah, the triomphe.
right? Yeah. So that's the situation they are in. And look at the observers, how they're looking, you see from the different, and then we make a short tour. What's happening to those people? This is at the Tapijn, where the debriefing starts. They had our first flight, and I'm telling them a little bit content-wise about what happened. And they are listening, and they went first to the winding down, okay. And then our students will talk.
So these guys were remarkably unstressed.
Yeah,
They
typical.
were really chill. Like we've seen people scream, we've seen people silently dying, but Velma was like, we should do that, yeah, we should do that. Are you taking care of that? Yes, I'm doing that. Are you already? Yeah, me too. Okay, great. Should we stop now? Yeah, let's stop now. They were super in sync.
Yeah, you would recruit them.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of them lovely anyway. So.
Now this is in my office. I have the same equipment in my office. I have screens on my office. I have a data projector. And we are looking at the observers. And,
because you might think it's more relaxed for them, right? For the pilots, they have the immediate stress. But the observers, they feel a lot of emotions too. So here, everything's still going fine. The plane is in the air. Pilots are not shouting, not silently going to kill themselves. It's fine. And then things happen. This is 10 seconds later. So I noticed the plane was going to take this. I was like, okay, I'm just going to take a picture, because we show them these pictures afterwards as well. They don't realize how emotional they are and how strongly they react. So we try to sit them next to the pilots or behind the pilots so that they're not distracted by the emotional reactions of people next to them, right? That's another source. So we try to put it to the side and to the back. And now we have a really nice video.
Yes, and we should tell a little bit about the situation the team is facing. Yeah.
So the situation is as follows. The team of two, they have already been flying. We have two girls in this team. This was a group where we didn't have any boys there, so it was not a choice, it was just what we had. We try to mix the teams as much as possible among the volunteers because it allows you to look at different assumptions for how you're expected to behave in certain roles. Sometimes it's harder if you've been socialized female to also be assertive, right? It's less appreciated than the other way around. So in this case, we're going to see two girls who are flying, and they have been flying one mission before. They were doing very, very well, but they got really stressed, especially the pilot, that's the girl with the black hair. She was really, really stressed, and in the reflection, she told her co-pilot, I don't think I can do this one more time. I know we succeeded, but this is so much, I don't know if I can do it. The co-pilot said, I'll take care of you. What if I do this, this, and this? Are you willing to fly once more with me? So I said, okay, let's give it a try. And what you see is the co-pilot, girl with the brown hair, taking care of the pilot in the black hair. And you also see the observers on the side who are greatly enjoying themselves because we just cut off the fuel supply. We gave them the hardest mission. So they have to make a decision. Do we keep flying straight, hope we clear the mountain, and then find an airport behind the mountain? We know it's not possible. The students don't know. Or do we turn around and return to the airport that we started from? So this is the situation. They're receiving instructions. Do we go ahead? Do we have to turn? And the pilot was really, really stressed.
Yeah? Okay.
So do you want to turn around? Because I do. Let's balance first. 65 knots. Okay. I'm
Don't bother looking at your attitude indicator or directional gyro. We lost the vacuum system when the engine stopped.
I need to be around 60, so therefore we sometimes let it go down, and I do full speed, but make sure we don't crash. Okay, a little bit more nose up, and we go make a round, a turn. You can do it.
So what do you hear the co-pilot have? What do you see her do to take care of the stress of our pilot?
You can do it, encourage her.
She encourages her, you can do it, right?
This is specific instructions.
Yeah, that's what they agreed upon. That it's easier for her to understand what the co-pilot wants her to do if she uses hand signals going up, going down, going around. That it's easier to interpret than just giving a normal command. Do you also notice how they're pausing each other when information is coming in? They said, no, don't talk now. That's something they discussed beforehand. Super clever to avoid the overwhelm. And they're being kind to each other. And as you can see, a lot is happening. If you paid attention to the observers, they were reacting, right? They're going backwards, forwards, they're squirming in the seat. Well, apart from Tim, he's laughing because he was already flying before. He stayed as an observer from the previous session. He was having a really, really fun day. But they're taking care of each other. And they learn to do that by going through the first round, by getting feedback, being very open and vulnerable with each other. Look, I don't know if I can do this again. Being open, having a response from someone who was saying, not judging, but saying, okay, if that's the situation, how can we change the conditions to still make this an effective experience? Do you trust me to do this again with me if we do it this way? And they did. And they came out smiling. They landed without fuel supply in the middle of the Alps where they've never been before. So they walked out and said, are you proud of them? Yeah. And you can be out loud proud, like it's fine, you did really, really, really well. And you can see that it did a lot with their self-esteem as well. So one of the students has a learning disability, the other student is struggling with her language, and they walked out like, we can do this.
They were the number 4 team ever.
To land with the cup fuel.
Yeah, all the rest
fantastic.
Crashed. What you probably didn't notice is that the stall alarm was constantly going off.
Yeah.
So they were in a high risk situation.
Essentially, here's the mountain. You have to make the decision, do I fly over, do I manage without fuel, or do I turn on the mountainside and then return back? So that's the alarm that they got because they were deciding to turn, which is the right decision, but they're really close to the mountainside.
Yeah? Okay, so that's just one part of the story then. So yes, senses are important. So what we see with many, like Terence said, many students that have red flags all over their body. They are shaking. They're very emotional. And when you talk to graduates, what did you learn in your math? They will start talking about this, because that's for them it's a game changer. The literature is they start reading literature in a different way. For example, teams are for them now something real. They had the experience and so forth and so forth. So what we did was that if you look at the simulation of team learning, yes, it's about vision. So that's a sense. It's sound. It's also movement. So what you see with their bodies are constantly moving. Also the observers.
Some teams that are about to crash, they literally go forward, like anticipating the brace.
Yeah. The other is it's very emotional. Like Therese said, we had some issues in the past that we didn't even notice how emotionally, stressful it is for them. And we really worked hard on this to establish more trust in us, how they can trust each other. And the third is that we are very explicit on reflecting on what happens. How does it relate to all the things I've been reading in the literature? What can they learn from? What could they do in the next mission? And how can they improve? And so on, without being judgmental, which is very difficult for me. Because in the end, when they crash, it's pretty bad. But sometimes I do this kind of workshop with real pilots in the audience. And they never, what I notice is they never judge. They are very factual. Yet you're tempted to say this is bad or it's good. No, withhold. That's the way they are trained is you never do. You made a crash and that's all it is. Yeah? Or you are flying too fast or too low. But they don't say your speed is not okay. That's not what they do to avoid it.
They were also doing that she was summing up facts. Like,
yes.
Okay, this is like, I have to go to 60.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's also calmed me down because they were talking about just facts and then
we're not to this, not to
Yeah,
that. You
no.
should do more
Yeah.
that. No, this is what we want
Yeah.
to achieve.
Yeah.
But they
Okay.
did that before too, so they were very kind beforehand, but now they were more explicit about it, specifically for one of them. It's one of my favorite examples, it's just so nice to see.
Yeah.
So once we got that experience, and now we know a little bit how to do it, we use that kind of insights for when working with a real company. And so a couple of years ago, Therese wrote a PhD thesis on how auditors judge. So auditors or accountants from firms, how they judge, and also how they make mistakes. And that was very important because at that moment there was a lot of
Lots of
scandals. Government was unhappy with the performance of those firms. They were threatening to revoke their licenses and so forth and so forth.
There's public naming and shaming of partners who had signed financial statements that turned out not to be okay, and that's the end of your career, right? You may be in your late 40s and that's it. You're never getting a job in that field again.
So that's the situation. And then they found out about our work and they invited us to come over and help them out and so forth. And we worked together for them for several years. And so the setting is basically, when you think about those people, is they go through a lengthy training part, just like doctors, medical doctors. So it's 4 years, you do your bachelor, your master, then 4 years postgraduate, and then another 2 years where you get additional training. Then finally you get your license to practice, and then you still need to make your career throughout the company before finally you are a partner and you are allowed to sign off the audit and so forth and so forth. There's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of monitoring and regulation, and in that setting they ask us to train them the way they work in teams. To get the experience. Maybe you want to tell a little bit more about it.
So the idea was that the firm had noticed they had quality issues. They were being criticized massively by the press, by the government, by regulators, whatever you can imagine. So what did they do? As you do in business, you put incentives in place, didn't give them the results they wanted. We put more procedures in place, more checklists, more required things you have to do, things you have to document and to show to prevent mistakes from happening. Didn't have the effect that they wanted. And then they figured at some point maybe it's more about the behavior and the people, but they didn't have the language to do that, they didn't have the knowledge, they felt this is where it's at, but they didn't know what to do about it. So via, they ended up with us, and we were integrating into their culture change initiative. Their idea was to go from a profitability culture to a quality-oriented culture. They were also struggling with high turnover, which was because people were burnt out, they weren't really seeing the purpose anymore. So they wanted to address that by creating a quality-oriented culture. And this is, of course, a multi-year effort. And they put us at the beginning, at the launch of that program, so that we could give all of the auditors that are already certified, that was 1,200 people, a common experience and a starting point with language, so that they could use that as a starting point for motivating people to engage in the culture change, the language to discuss. So we trained 1,200 auditors in groups of 50, two groups a day, so 100 people every day, and we did that over 3 months. I've never been that close to a burnout, but they were feeling better after, so we were some new stuff. The objectives we were given for this experience was that it has to be a shared experience that is emotional, so that connects people meaningfully to what is happening, because that should serve as a motivation to get through the culture change in a positive and motivated manner, to give them the language that would be needed to talk about emotions, to talk about behaviors, to talk about different states that you have in teams, and therefore to prepare people to participate actively in the culture change to come. If I don't have the language, I cannot participate, I'm excluded. So making sure that we open that door for people to actually go along with the culture change, to provide input, that was the goal. So I didn't sleep very well in that preparation time, you can imagine this, because this is a tall order. Right? If we think of the implications for all of these things, right, it's times 50. The amount of people, the expectations. I'm not an auditor myself, right? I'm an outsider coming in, trying to tell them what to do. That's a huge order. And then for Wim, just let's be honest, it's easier because you're a professor, right? Who am I? Right? I was a few years younger, I look younger than I am. It's not really helping. I have to pass an exam before people trust that I know what I do, oftentimes. right? For you, the assumption is that it's fine.
Yeah, but I had to pass a different exam, so I'm not one of them. And so they started saying things to me like, thank God I never studied psychology, and you're a psychologist, so I wish you all the luck with my business training, that kind of stuff. So you get all the usual stuff. Adults are very nice people to each other. Okay, so, but I have a beard and I'm looking a little bit moral, whatever. So we're using that. So it was basically about you needed to set the stage to make it happen. We needed to build a team simulator.
Yeah.
We need to give them the experience. And we had a talk with a Harvard professor and saying, this is a problem you're facing. And she was thinking and thinking, and then she said, give those bastards hell. That's basically what she said. She said in a very kind and diplomatic way, she said, let's give them the emotion. That's the only thing which will change their mind.
If they don't feel it, those bastards will never change. I think that's what she
something
said
like
at the
that.
time.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So
that's what we did. So imagine the following. You're coming to your annual training. You have 2 days where you get trained and you think, okay, I'm getting updates on some standards and they show me how to use an update of the computer system. Oh, I don't care. You come inside and there are group tables, which already, the trainings are all, like you sit in rows, you listen, right? And you come in and there's tables and we welcome you very friendly and say, oh, what is your function level? Oh, you're a partner, great. Would you mind sitting here? And then, oh, you're a senior, that's great. Would you mind joining him at the table? And we would assemble teams that have different hierarchical levels as if they were working in practice. So people may or may not have known each other beforehand. So instruction number 1 was get to know each other. And then you would expect, like, oh yeah, I live there, I have this kind of hobby. It went Peter, partner Amsterdam, which basically puts you here in the hierarchy, right? Amsterdam is the top office. If you are Aisha, associate Groningen, that puts you very much at the bottom of the food chain. That's how they introduce themselves to each other. So we know, hierarchy, kind of important here. And then they would start like, oh yeah, I worked with a colleague from Amsterdam before. Then, you climb the ladder, right? So they were negotiating with each other who was in power. We didn't even tell them what they had to do yet. So then we followed up with the instructions. Together with the firm, we had developed a very difficult case where they would have to rely on each other by sharing information to come to a judgment. Our client, are they going to be alive financially a year from now, yes or no? Nobody can predict the future, so that's a really, really difficult thing to do. And you have to put together information from different sources in order to support why you think yes or no. And you don't know if you're going to be right. And people may judge you for getting it wrong with the limited information you had, but you're still responsible later. So pressure is really, really high. Then we told them what they had to do. They got some information about the case. There hadn't been any issues before, but now suddenly there was a claim and someone got injured in a factory. Those are not good things. The bank is still deciding to give a loan. That's a really bad thing financially. So we need to be alert. Then we gave them different information for each of the team members, right? If I'm a less experienced person, I can't process all of the high-level stuff. So we gave these people at the bottom of the food chain very factual information that is super critical for the overall judgment. If I don't listen to the junior members in my team, no way am I going to succeed in this exercise, right? But it seems more trivial because it's the easily accessible information. If you don't pay attention, that's it. For the partners, for example, those are the highest ranking ones, we gave overarching things. So there's a report on how the sector is doing overall. Or there has been a culture change initiative at the client and the beanbag chairs have now been delivered. Right, that's one of the irrelevant items we gave them. So they have to negotiate what is relevant across different hierarchical ranks. And that's the part that I enjoy very much. We put them under time pressure. So they had 45 minutes for the whole task, and then we were walking around with a smile, saying you have 40 minutes left, you have 35 minutes left, 30 minutes left now. And every time you could hear the level of noise go up in the room. Every time we highlighted the time, the stress went up. They started to have red dots, some people started shouting, they started talking faster, and they started to be more dominant in their behavior. So you would hear after a while with many of the teams, the leaders would continue to talk, the junior members would start to become more and more and more silent. We had one team that didn't talk at all for 40 minutes. We had one team that made jokes. They had given themselves a team name, they were having a chant to motivate each other, and they were having a fantastic time. It was all in the same room. And because they were so focused, they didn't necessarily didn't really realize what was happening around them. One more. Yes. So they are exchanging information. That's the stressful period that I'm talking about. Then they have to record their decision. And then after 45 minutes, we relieved them and said, okay, that's great. The first part of the session is over. You can go and have a coffee now and decompress and reflect a bit, talk a bit. And then I was logging into our system and I was pulling their information immediately, putting it into slides. We show you an example so that we could give them immediate quantitative feedback. Again, this target group really likes numbers, so there we were. And we were then using that immediate feedback as a starting point for them to discuss how did you get there. It's not about right or wrong necessarily, but it's how did you get there? Because you all have the same information, but you guys think, okay, this client is doomed and we need to flag it now to the government, this is horrible. You guys saw the same information and think, that's probably fine, here's my signature. How did this happen? How did you get to those different conclusions with the same information? And by doing that, we did that in increments, so we showed them a little bit of feedback, we had them react, and then we gave them a bit of insight from research that we used to share language. Then we had them reflect, okay, what does that mean, that research for us? We gave them the next piece of feedback. So we walked them through it step by step, introducing one concept at a time after they had experienced it. And they knew what it felt like. And then in the end, together with a facilitator from the firm, they talked about how does that now contribute to the culture change, what's going to happen, how are they going to be invited to contribute, what is the language going to be around that.
Okay, then for the feedback.
Yes.
We put all the information on individuals that bring their own laptop with them. And that laptop connected to a Maastricht University server, there was a case on it, and so we could monitor what they were looking at while they were analyzing the case. So we had real-time information on how they solved the case. And so one of the things we did was we presented heat maps. Heat maps, that's one of your favorite stuff, yes.
So we split the group into different experimental conditions over time because 1,200 people love the opportunity for research, right? So we collected data for 11 different experiments. In this experiment, we split them into the information you get on your client. It's exactly 50-50. You have no idea what's going to happen. Some things are bad, some things are good. It cancels each other out. Horribly difficult to make the decision. The other group got information where the client wasn't doing that well. And as you can see here, they recognize that this side represents information that the client is a bit more in trouble. So this is the liability side, which means stuff that the company is owing, right? So here, compared to this group, they realized, oh, this person's in trouble. So this is good, right? If we see the neutral client, where we see a little bit of scattered interest, that's okay. But the group picked up on that this company's in trouble. We did have teams where this was reversed, where there was no visible difference at all. So that's the first thing to think about. What do we pay attention to when we see information in the first place? And why is it so different? This is a picture from the most junior members of the team, and you see a lot of different dots. For partners, sometimes there were only 3 dots left in the whole display. They have such tunnel vision. They think if this, and this is okay, I don't care about the rest. But there may be important stuff in the rest as well. So having them see that visually, how different it is, what I pay attention to, what you may pay attention to, it's really encouraging to make sure we communicate and we get that perspective from someone else. Without having the visual, I can make that assumption, but I will not see it. And this is really irrefutable. It's what they just did. It's very hard to argue with this. And that was really helpful to get them to the mindset of, oh, that's why we have to do this in a team, all right. Some of them weren't sure why they were working in teams, even if they had done it for 30 years. We didn't anticipate that. Then we asked them, okay, how likely is it that your client is still alive, right, in a year from now? Again, for some information it was neutral, for others they weren't doing that well. And we asked them how confident they felt in their judgment. And we had the wildest counts here. Some people said, I'm 100% sure. You can never be 100% sure because you're predicting the future, what is happening with you, right? Some teams, they were scoring 20%. So you indicated 20%, but you gave a judgment in the end. How do you set your signature under something that you're just 20% sure about? Shouldn't that ring some alarm bells for you? Oh yeah, now that you're mentioning it, that's probably a problem. Okay, so making these things explicit and then linking them to each other and making it, in this case, very quantitative because that's what the target group is familiar with, that was really motivating for them to consider, how did we get here? How did this happen? If you show the next slide. So we see that is two teams in this simulation that said, oh yeah, actually here's my signature, you're fine, right? Where everyone else said, no. At least we have to put a paragraph that we're concerned about a few things. So if this backfires, at least we have indicated that we were concerned before, but it's not escalating yet. If this blows up, these teams are fine. These two teams will be on the top of NSA. And they will be invited to the government and to the oversight body, and probably a few people will lose their job. How does that happen? Same information. And that's where emotionally it clicks, right? Sometimes we have shame, where you think, like, oh God, like people really trying to hide. Sometimes we have team like, yeah, we did really, and then they get silent. So having this feedback is a bit of a corrective mechanism to make sure that you have a better understanding of the actual performance. And then they're ready to discuss where it's coming from. So we don't have pictures, obviously, for multiple privacy reasons.
But we do have stories. And we have 6 minutes. And one of the favorite stories, 5 minutes. One of the favorite stories is that so they have the experience, they're getting very emotional, you know, why did this happen? They start comparing to the other teams, how they were doing. They also start seeing that some teams having a lot of fun while the others are, you know, it was a very harsh experience. And then something happens. Something happens where someone says, you know, I feel so stressed up, it was a young person, I feel so stressed up in doing this kind of work, I need to cry. And she started telling stories about how she was crying at her job and the stress was, you know, but the same that she loves the job and she hates the job, that kind of story.
And people were assuring her, oh, but that shouldn't happen, if that happens, you come to us, and we talk to you, it's fine. And they try to reassure her.
And then a partner stands up and she says, you know what? If you need to cry, over there is a bathroom. Then once you're done, come back and we continue your work.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So that's the situation we are facing. So the heat is rising in that moment.
We had just discussed psychological safety, trust, taking time to meet each other, to get to know each other as people. Everybody had just agreed that this was a good thing to do. This partner speaks up and the room is silent. We are the facilitators.
Yeah.
So our stress level is rising, right? We're thinking, oh shit, how do we handle this?
Yeah.
Then what happens?
Yeah, we were looking at each other. Teresa, say something. Yeah,
and I think, no, wait, this is for you.
And she looked at, maybe you should say it. So, and before that happens, 2 other partners stand up and say, you know what, this is not the way we want to work in this company. We need to talk later to you. And then you feel the emotions relieved. Yeah.
And those 2, they turned around and said, if any one of you is experiencing this, you know my face, you come and see me and I sort it out. I'm a co-owner of this company and I do not accept that this is how we treat each other. Come to me, I sort it out. I'll take care of you. And then they looked the partner in the eye who had spoken up first and said, see you in the break. And then during lunch, everybody was silently eating, side-eyeing a conversation between 3 partners in a separate room that we couldn't hear, but we saw the gestures and we saw the stress. And everybody was really, really happy to be in the lunchroom and not in the small meeting room. But those partners would never have discovered that they think about how they expect their teams to function, that it's so different, and the values are so misaligned if they hadn't had a shared experience. This would never have happened. So what the company does now is they have intervision sessions where partners come together and they discuss how they guide their teams, what they find acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And now we are, by now 6 years later, and they have let go the partner that was the most profitable for the firm because the partner refused for multiple years to adjust their behavior, to focus on professional development, on respectful ways of interacting with their team. So they have followed through on their culture claim and they made it very public internally that this is the choice they made. They didn't choose for profitability anymore, they didn't accept it, but they chose for quality. And those are very strong signals. Letting go of a partner, that doesn't happen. If you're a co-owner of the company, you've made your way there, you've earned your way there. So this is a really strong cultural signal, right, that you are serious about the change. And this started by becoming aware, hey, not all partners think alike, even though we make that assumption.
Yeah, I think because there's a wrap-up then.
Yes.
So you will bring us to the slide we're having in mind.
Yes.
I think your initiative of senses-based learning makes a lot of sense. Because there's a difference between, we could have been teaching them on Teams, So you could have told them a lot about the research we were doing on the importance of trust, coordination, communication, and safety. And they would have said, yeah, sounds interesting and so forth. But giving them the emotional experience made a major change within the company. And so my personal experience is as well how difficult that is, by the way, if you want to people engage through simulations and give them the experience and the emotions, because you get confronted with situations you never planned in advance. And so it requires the most from you to manage that kind of situation.
Maybe to wrap up,
Yes.
Our main lessons learned as teachers, we cannot anticipate the situation we're going to end up in. So we need to be prepared to provide personalized guidance, personalized support, and that may look very different for each team that is in the flight simulator, for the teams that are in the business simulator. We need to be ready to be able to provide that personalized support. And that's hard work. It means you have to be alert, you have to monitor all the time, you have to ask what the team needs, you have to be comfortable with not knowing. And it's really important to communicate that as well. It's like, I'm here to take care of you, but we do that together. Right? I cannot read your mind, but I'm here for you. Tell me what you need, together we'll figure it out. For the students and or participants in business, what we found out that it's very important to have a predictable process. What is going to happen, in which order, what is expected of me. But that there's a lot of autonomy in how they're able to engage in the task. So if you have anything that is graded, there shouldn't be any guesswork on what the rubrics are, what the criteria are, but how you get there, if you make it a rap battle, if you make it an essay, if you make it a video, that shouldn't matter, right? Because that's the autonomy that engages people the way that is most natural for them. For feedback, it's very critical to think about the timing, right? Do I give people some time to breathe? Do I do it immediately so they don't forget? But also, how do I combine formative and summative feedback? We think of assessment always as a grade. That's not true. There's so many other ways that we can engage. So it's important to think about this before, and you gave beautiful examples of how to do that. Thank you for that. Finally, there is always going to be emotion. The more senses you engage, the more realistic the experience, the more emotional. And that means we need to take into account personal dynamics, personal relevance, starting points that students have or participants have, for making sure there's safety and that there's trust. So don't just have the experience, give people a bit of time to get to know each other, to get to know you. If you don't have that luxury, make sure you're explicit about that and you tell them, why am I here? Why am I doing these things? What is my reasoning behind it? What does that do with you? Tell me, I'm interested in learning because maybe we can adjust to make it more effective. And that kind of interaction we feel is the cornerstone for making those kind of experiences work.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question, will slides will be shared afterwards?
Yes, sure.
That's great. We're going to fix the lunch, but there's still a beautiful presentation Elena will introduce.
Yes, thank you so much, first of all, for your lovely presentation. Does anyone have any questions for...
We're also here during lunch if you want to know more.
That's also possible. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. And so after this wonderful presentation, there will be another presentation done by a student actually this time. So Roy Erkens, our colleague from Maastricht Science Program, does a course called Tropical Biology. And for this course, one of the assignments for the students was to make an art exhibition, and the students themselves will tell you better, and Roy. So please welcome Nubia, Peter Felder, and Roy Erkens. They will.
I don't want to steal Nubia's thunder, so I'm not going to say too much, but she asked me to say a bit about the content or the context of the assignment. So indeed, it's a class in tropical biology, so the students need to learn about what tropical biology is, so where are the tropics, what kind of vegetation do you see, what is a tropical forest, how does it function, etc. It's a third-year class, or a 3000 level class in the Bachelor of the Maastricht Science Program, which means we work mainly on scientific literature, and students have a lot of freedom to discuss particular cases that I made for them, but there's not one right answer per case, right? So what is a tropical forest? Well, it can depend on if you look at an African forest or a forest in South America, and I give students a lot of freedom to roam a bit, depending on the group they're in, which direction they want to take. So for the class has set outcomes in the sense that you should be able to explain the evolution, the theories around the origin of a forest. But which exactly theory you discuss, etc., I don't mind. It's like in real life, as I'm a scientist, I have different experience from a colleague. So if you ask me the question, you get a different answer, and I don't mind about the exact answer as long as you can give a coherent answer. In that respect, I also thought it was a bad idea to set a standard exam, right? So to give students a lot of freedom in terms of PBL to make their own learning path, and then we say, no, but if you don't answer these 6 questions, then you don't know it. So I wanted to avoid that. And I'm a very big fan of something called universal design for learning. It's a bit like, it actually attaches a bit to what you say. So what you want to do in your examination, the goals need to be clear, but you remove anything that's not relevant. So why would it be relevant for knowing about tropical ecology that you show it in an exam? Is a written exam really the best way of doing this? Well, maybe it might, but I cannot come up with a reason. It's maybe if I put a student in a lab, he needs to operate a machine and he needs to push button 1, 5, 7, and that you need to do, and otherwise your machine will explode, then the test should be that you can press those buttons, because that makes sense. But in this case, I don't think that's really a good idea, so I try to remove obstacles to learning that way. And also in this class, therefore, students have the total freedom to decide whatever they want to do to show me that they met the learning outcomes of the class. So the goal is set, the level is set, but I don't put any prerequisites on how they are going to do this. They need to make a proposition for that, we discuss that. Often I need to tweak it, not in the sense of that the idea is bad, but the ambition level is way too high. So once a student say, I'm going to build you a real living microcosm of a tropical rainforest. I said, in 6 weeks? Okay, maybe that's a bit too ambitious. Okay, maybe a different type of model. So that's one thing. Of course, the problem is we do need to add some form of assessment, but also there, I'm very lazy, so I don't decide this. I say to the students, well, given these are the goals, make me a rubric on how you want to be assessed. So you know what the outcomes are. I want you to do something about it, it needs to be something about content, but you make the rubric. So that means that they think about how to show it, but also how they need to be assessed on it. It's also nice because they never can, once that student said, I didn't really went very well, but I can't blame you for it, because these are my own, and it's clear that I didn't meet my own requirements. So that is very, very nice. So I get a tremendous different number of exercises. I get videos, I get magazines, I've had an escape room. Last year we saved the Earth from environmental disaster, and we were spoken to by President Joe Biden, who they made a video about Biden telling that there was a problem, and in the end thanking them for saving the Earth, with assignments that had to do with the content of the class, where they showed how that. I had interpretive plays, and this year a wonderful art exhibition in which the students, I think, were very well able to show and convey what they've learned, but also that they met the learning activities or the learning outcomes of my class. So maybe, Nubia, you can then explain what you did. Yeah.
So a group of 4 of us, we came together and decided for our final presentation that we're going to do like a multi-sensory art exhibition. So in the other room, you will see a lot of different artworks that you can interact with differently. I would love to explain 2 of them more in detail, so if everyone wants to get up and go to the other room. Also, this artwork in general is just about tropical ecology and a lot of different facets of it, so I'll explain a bit more in the other room. Okay, welcome, good afternoon. And we seem to have a little bit of a cozier group this afternoon, which is nice. My name is Andrea Smitten. I share the ambassador role with my colleague and director of the STILL team, Anka Sambath, who was here this morning, who has had a veterinarian emergency she has to run away for. So she's left me on my lonesome. But I just wanted to share with you a little bit about the projects that we've been doing as part of our ambassador role at FPN. So we work at the Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience. And this year, I was involved in developing a new master's elective, and just wanted to tell you a little bit about it. I have you for about an hour. We're going to do a little bit of a shared information about this new course, and then I'm going to talk to you all about sensory integration. We touched on it last year, if you were at the symposium last year, so we're going to do a bit of review with that, but far more interactive. So for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and then we're going to go next door for the last 20 minutes and really kind of get our hands dirty and sort of play with a couple of toys and some, I've got some
interesting self-assessments that you can try on yourself to gain a better insight into your own sensory processing. Yeah, so first I just wanted to quickly, in 5 or 6 minutes, tell you about this course that we developed as part of our role. So this was, the course was titled Clinical Assessment in Psychology. So it was a master's level practical. So it was a short course. It consisted of 5 tutorials and 2 lectures. And this year it was the first time that FPN offered electives across master tracks. So typically students who are that are interested in clinical would be your neuropsychology students, but this year the electives were open to all tracks. So we were the most popular elective. We had 167 students sign up, surprisingly. Yeah, it was a shock. And they were from all over. So legal, health and social, also neuropsychology, but there was another track, work and organizational. So it was really interesting because we had lots of different experience and knowledge coming together. So we found that was really good and interesting. The course focused on introduction of models and methods of clinical reasoning. We found that this was a piece that typically is in some ways missing from the psychological assessment, so trying to make that more ecological. And the tools that we were introducing were assessment tools, specifically focusing on anxiety and depression batteries, attention and memory batteries, and sensory processing assessments. So that's what the course was about. The learning objectives, as you can see, we're here. So we really were trying to focus in such a short amount of time. We wanted to expose them to quite a bit of new theory. So clinical reasoning in particular, but then also sensory integration, both as a theory and then as assessment tools. So a lot of psychology students who have studied at their bachelor in psychology have already some familiarity with some assessment tools, for instance, in anxiety or in memory or cognition, but very little, almost none of them had any experience doing sensory assessments. So we found that that was really interesting, and so part of the learning objectives was to be able to gain practical experience with these tools. So we had all the assessments, and each tutorial they would practice with each other, and they would also do kind of a little bit of mock and interviewing and that sort of thing, and using these tools. More specifically then, the parts that were sensory were tutorial 2 specifically was allocated exclusively to sensory assessments. So we introduced standardized and non-standardized tools to assess modulation, so that the one side of the sensory dysfunctions, and then also some praxis and postural and functional processing differences. So we had tools that assess both. They also had to complete an online course, like a CPD online course in regards to sensory integration awareness. And then the very first lecture was all about sensory integration theory and assessment. So that was the sort of sensory specific piece. We used benefited from the pre-course feedback forms that were provided to us from the project. And I kind of summarized them here just into 3 kind of common themes. So first of all, at the beginning of the module, most people all thought we have 5 senses, right? Which is the typical understanding. And that for the most part, these senses are an unconscious process. When asked about what was the most valuable for their clinical work, the consensus was probably visual and auditory, because I'm going to be speaking to people, and so really just kind of thinking those typical senses that we're using in everyday, not really absorbing or understanding that there are other options. And then in regards to controlling your senses, the consensus was that you cannot control your senses, but you could control the attention you place on the perception of the sensation. So that was kind of the pre-course understanding from the master's students. Then the post-course feedback was really, really impressive, and we were quite taken aback. They, when asked this question, what are the benefits of developing your sensory skills in your future life, this was the list that came out. And we were like, wow. So they talked about, enhanced perception, sharpening your sensory skills for a deeper understanding. They talked about improving communication to aid in understanding more verbal and nonverbal cues. They talked about better decision making, being, again, more attuned in making more informed decisions, using an increased creativity, which was lovely. Again, this theme that keeps coming up from this morning, this heightened safety and awareness of patients and clients, and then an overall enhanced well-being. Overall, it was quite positive. Some of the more constructive feedback was that the course was too short, and now they want it to be a 6-credit course instead of 3. So we'll see about that, because that's a lot more work. But overall, it was more the reading or missing literature, having too much literature or something. There wasn't anything about introducing this new topic. So we found that overall very positive, really nice feedback from the students. So this is just from one of the tutors suggesting that we develop it into an even bigger course, and that they found that this topic would be really relevant across all specializations to be able to practice with different assessments, including more specifically those sensory tools. And then just some other updates from our role from FPN. As Emily mentioned this morning, we're trying to work with the library and the well-being group to see whether we can create this sensory space, which would be really amazing if we could get that off the ground. They've developed this in other universities across Europe where they have this. It features for all students, but for all of them, but in particular for our neurodivergent group who do struggle sometimes with the environments of university. So we're working on that. And then also it's been nice because we of course have been collaborating with other colleagues and thinking about future projects. So that's just a little summary of where we've gotten to in this last year. We just wanted to share it with you. Any questions about the course?
I do have a question. In the slide where you talked about what it is that you actually do in the course, sorry, I'm really grossly generalizing, but I had a question about whether you, when students are engaging, you said was it like physical, or when they're doing, are they just assessing like a potential client or patient, their disorders with that, or are they also paying attention to using those skills as a way of maybe assessing in general, a patient's state of mind, or their psychological, or their feeling toward themselves, or
because the whole course is titled clinical assessment.
Right.
So it's a whole.
It's not just using it to their posture is but it's really about using it.
Yeah, because typically in neuropsychology, they have a set amount of assessments that they go to, right? Like most practices. Right. And so we were trying to just broaden that toolkit so that then they have an awareness that there are sensory dysfunctions that they may have never considered as part of the picture of the patient, so that they have that extra piece in their clinical reasoning when they're assessing someone.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
So in particular, they're really interested in learning about sensory tools for their assessment, for anxiety and depression tools, and for attention and memory tools. So that's what we did. Yeah.
One question: what would the space look like?
Our tutor rooms?
Yes.
Yeah, bog standard, regular old tutor rooms in FPN, UNS 40.
The sensory space.
The sensory space.
In the library.
Yes.
Right. So this is something that I'm trying to work with one of the counselors and psychologists in the well-being team, and so they are I've met with them to discuss what would be potentially good to put in there and the evidence behind what's good to go in there. And so in my professional role as an occupational therapist, I've created these rooms in lots of different either health or education settings. So we're in conversations about what would work for a broad group of students of this age, and specifically then supporting that other population of the neurodiverse students who also struggle. So
Can
thinking
you give
about,
an example of an object, or because for me it's very difficult to.
we're going to play with a lot of it next door.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some things you can try. Yeah, but of course you may have seen things where there's. I had a video actually. I didn't prepare that for today, but I can put it on the network where there's a university in Galway. In Ireland, and they've just installed one of these rooms, and so it controls for light and sound. There's different textures, there's different seating arrangements, there's rooms, there's areas for movement, there's areas for quiet calm, so that kind of a thing.
And can I ask generally what's the intended purpose of this room? Like, is it to help students develop their sensory perceptive abilities, or is it to help students who are neurodivergent to find their comfort place, or like kind of study space that works best for them, or is it like
probably a combination of both? I think it's feeding into this well-being movement and thinking about serving the needs of all of our students, not just the neurodiverse, but as we know and I get to this in the slides, the prevalence of our neurodiversity is that we have an awful lot of students and staff who are. So actually, if we had space like this, then that can help meet their needs, but also the greater needs of the student population. Yes.
And if I may add to what you're stating, I have been working actually as part of a diversity and inclusivity office grant on supporting students with ADHD and autism at the university.
Right.
And several of them have mentioned the need that they have for such rooms, that is either for managing overstimulation or for unmasking. Yes. Or using some fidgeting, some forms of vending also. So quite often they are feeling overwhelmed, overstimulated, and they are looking for ways for balancing themselves again, or being more grounded again.
Interesting.
Could I still ask a question?
Of course, yeah. While we sort this out.
Yeah, you did the pre-course survey, like there's a census, but you didn't report an after-course survey. So did anything change their mind? Do you know?
Well, the after-course was that whole list of things they found that they learned.
Yeah, but I mean, so they were. Did they also realize that there are more than 5 senses?
Yes.
Or okay.
Yeah. So they, of course, because they did. We had the theory, we had the lecture, which some of these slides are from, and then also they did the online CPD course. So at the end, the learning objectives of understanding sensory integration theory were met. But in general, that even basic assumption that there only are 5, almost exclusively everyone was on the other side of that. So
How about the one with you cannot control your senses, only what was the formulation again? That last one? How was that?
Because this idea that they're unconscious and you can't influence it, right? Yeah. And I think having an experience of trying out some of the assessments helped with that. But I think also we were only just on the cusp because a lot of them were really interested in intervention. And this wasn't an intervention course, it was an assessment course. So I think we're just getting the interest. We're just getting them into it. So hopefully in the future we can develop a more in-depth assessment course, and then maybe further on more an intervention style course. Yeah.
Cool.
Any other questions? Okay. Yeah, so moving straight along. So this is some of the slides that were from the lecture. And if you were here last year, this might be a little bit of a review. So I'm Andrea, and before teaching with Still, I've been working for over 20 years as a clinical specialist occupational therapist, and I have an advanced practitioner training in sensory integration. So I can assess and treat specifically for those conditions, but it's just one of the tools that a therapist uses. And so this is a particular interest of mine, and when I found out about the project, I dove straight in, and so with the help of Anka. So obviously most of you in this room are probably much more knowledgeable about senses in general. So how many senses do we have?
8.
8. All right. I'm not even sure if it's worth us listening to the video this time. This is straight from our network page, our page here, and I'm going to see because I'm using Lean's computer, if it will still work. Yeah.
Sound, smell, taste, and touch. And 3 that you may not be familiar with. The vestibular sense, sometimes known as the gravity or balance sense, allows us to move smoothly. It helps us with balance while we walk and run, and to stay upright when we sit and stand. Proprioception is the sense of self-movement, force, and body position. It is present in every muscle movement you have. Without proprioception, you wouldn't be able to move without thinking about your next step. Interoception helps you understand and feel what's going on inside your body. For example, when you're hungry, thirsty, in pain, or need the toilet. Imagine for each of our 8 senses, we have a cup. And for us to feel regulated, each cup needs to be full. Each time we get some sensory input for one of our senses, it fills up the cup a little. For each sense, some of us have big cups, and some of us have small cups. Imagine you have a small cup for sound. It fills up quickly with a little noise, and any more could feel overwhelming. Imagine you have a big cup for proprioception. You will need lots of movement to feel regulated. Understanding someone's sensory profile is really important in order to know what they need to feel, learn, and perform at their best.
Okay, so then again, a little bit of theory for you behind what we're talking about when we're saying what is sensory processing. So essentially, the sensory processing part is really what the psychologists would call perception, right? So this is about if you had perceptual problems with any one of your senses. So this is the information that's coming in from any of your senses that you are perhaps not detecting as well, it's not being transmitted as well to the nervous system. And this is where this is happening is, of course, up in the cortex, right? So you've got the processing of sensory information in the somatosensory cortex. And then sensory modulation is another side of sensory processing, and that's more reticular formation brainstem area, right? And that's about how we, what we're really talking about when we say modulation or regulation is our arousal. So how does a particular sense affect our arousal? How does a certain scent make us more alert or more calm, right? That's what we're talking about when we say modulation, regulation. But when we're talking about discrimination, we're really talking about sensory processing. And sensory integration altogether is really just a combination of the two, all right? So just to give you some terminology, familiarize of what we're talking about. Typically, you know, everyone has their own sensory profile, right? And everybody has their own sensory preferences. And it's not to say that if yours is different from mine, that you have a dysfunction and I don't. It's really just when those sort of processing difficulties start to interfere with your function. So if it's interfering with you going and eating lunch in the lunchroom because you can't tolerate the smells or the lights, then that might be something that you think, oh, maybe I do have a problem with my visual or my auditory or my olfactory processing. So it's not to say everybody is unique, but it doesn't mean that it's a dysfunction until it starts to affect your everyday experiences. So in the most basic of senses, terms, sensory information is really about getting some input, having that processed in the central nervous system somewhere, and then having an adaptive response, right? So someone throws a ball at your face, and you either lift your hand up or you move out the way, right? So you are having, hopefully, yeah, so in its most simple form, good sensory integration is when this is happening. Okay. Now, let's test you to see if you all have really integrated sensory processing with this little activity. So, I'm going to pass around my little feely bag. I'm going to get you to work in pairs if you can, if you two want to sit a little bit closer together. And if one of you reaches in and grabs something, and don't look at it yet, just keep it in your hands. Don't show it to your partner. Take it out, yeah. Okay, so person A with the object. First, before you do anything, you're going to, person B, you're going to put your hand out flat like this, right? And when they're ready, person B is going to close their eyes. And person A is going to place the object onto person B's flat, open hand. Now you must try to guess what it is. Do not open your eyes. Okay, so person A, you can open your eyes. You know what it is. You can put it on to person B's hand now. Once they've closed their eyes. Now person B, with your eyes closed, try to figure out what is the object. You can try as best you can, but keep your hand extended and flat. No cheating, B, no cheating.
And flat.
Too hard? Okay, person B, you can now, if it's too difficult, you can start to move your fingers around the object. See if you have a better idea now. Okay, person B, open your eyes.
It's a little gorilla.
How many have you got? Hey, not bad, not bad. Okay, pretty good processing. Right, so those of you who got it, what did you notice about it? What information were you getting with a flat hand?
Weight.
You got some weight.
Texture.
Maybe a bit of texture. Yeah.
Temperature. Warmth. Cold.
It's the temperature of it. Yeah. Yeah. Then once you started to manipulate it, more information.
Shape.
Normally, hopefully.
More about the material.
Shape, the material. Yeah.
Size, of course.
Size, maybe a bit more texture.
Texture.
Yeah. Yeah. Did anyone get it straight away from the flat hand?
No.
I mean, they're pretty hard. It can sometimes, but they're people who've played the game. The frog is usually guessed pretty easy because it's like kind of sticky or something. I don't know what it is about that one. But yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Any other? So what's the big sense?
Touch.
Yeah. Touch, tactile, of course. But any others?
You can smell these things.
You could smell it. You might have been able to smell it. At some point, I do have lots of toys that were originally smelly, that had some scent to them. Half of them have lost their smell. But yeah, you might have been able to smell it. So yeah, you're hardly ever, I mean, you can never say never, but you're hardly ever only using one sensory system, right? So of course they're integrated. Of course we need all of them to be working in unison to be able to give us the right picture of what we're looking at or feeling. So what did you notice straight away then about your vision? What's it doing?
Instant recognition.
Instant. It's so strong. My goodness, that visual system is so compensatory. So it's overcoming for so many of our deficits that you might not even realize that you have a poor vestibular or a poor tactile because your eyes are just compensating for you all the time, right? So yeah, visual system so strong. So straight away, bam, I know what that is. Yeah, okay. Let's see, we'll do one more, another experiment. Yeah, this is just to remind us. The thing about the tactile system, of course, is that you have receptors, some on the surface, on the hair cells, some deeper, some further down, and they're giving us all different kinds of information. What do you think? Do you have more sensation on the back of your hand or on your palm?
On the palm.
Oh, I'm not sure. I would have said the back.
On the front.
I would say palm.
On the front. Yeah.
Yeah.
Far more.
Normally palm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And why would that be?
Different muscles.
Yeah, more muscular, sure. Think development.
Is the one you have to protect more?
So you use
Sure.
tools? Do you use tools?
It's where we explore the universe, right? It's where we learn about the world. So when we're grasping as babies, when we're putting things to our mouth, that we need to have more receptors on the palm to be able to get more information. So it's the same, right? If you think about, well, it depends how sensitive you are, but most of the time we have less receptors on our back, right, than we do on our forearm, for instance, right? So there's certain parts of our bodies that have more mechanical receptors.
Differentiate.
Yes, okay. Right, what was the next one I wanted to try with you?
When you get older, you get maybe even more faster images when you hold something.
Yeah,
Right?
why would that be?
Yeah, experience and yeah.
Yeah, you've got memory, right? You've got stored memories of that object. So going back to that to the brain picture in the nice, that homunculus region with that little guy with the big hands and feet and big mouth. He's been really well populated with experience. So as soon as you touch something, then that part of the brain, that region is going, oh, I recognize that.
But is it experience? Do you think it's only experience, or is it maybe also?
You mean like just built in?
Yeah. Or is
So that's a good question. So when do our senses start to develop? Any ideas?
In utero.
Yeah. In utero, right? In particular, the vestibular sense from, I think it's 8 weeks.
Wow.
Right? That's before the sex is known. Yeah? So if we think about when in clinic, we tend to find children who have difficulty riding bikes also came out breech. Right? So there's something about vestibular that, okay, if I didn't get my head down in the right way, if my brain didn't have that understanding from that early time, and I didn't have enough play experiences to sort of push through that and move through that, then it can kind of crop up later on. So it's kind of interesting, yeah. So very, very early, they are online, but if we're not practicing, it's that same idea, right? If you don't use it, you lose it. So the development is going to come with your normal development and building on that experience, that knowledge.
And also there are people that are hypersensitive to specific senses or hyposensitive to specific senses.
That's right, we're going to get to that. Yeah, exactly, and that's that modulation part. Okay, so next, let's test one more sense that you have. Right. So if everyone closes their eyes, reach your left arm above your head, and point your index finger up. And when you've done it, shout out, I got it.
I got it.
Got it. Okay, open your eyes. How do you know you got it? Yes, the proprioceptive system, right? So you do not, this is another system that if you occlude your vision, should be able to tell you where your body is in space. You have all of these receptors in your joints and your muscles, and it tells you where you are in the universe, where you end and the universe begins. So you think, well, that's really just a motor planning issue, that's just really about praxis. Actually, what we're finding, more and more research is coming out that people that have dysfunction proprioception also have really high levels of anxiety. They also have really difficulties with stress management. All these other different mental health conditions are intertwined, and we're starting to have a better understanding of how it's relating to that self-concept and the self-confidence, right? So knowing where you are in the world actually physically has quite a mental influence as well. Yeah. Okay. Where was I? Okay, we're going to do one more test. How are you all feeling? Your body's okay? We've had lunch. Are we a bit sleepy? Maybe we need to move a little bit. Let's see. Let's test one more sense. So if you could all just move in your chair a little bit. We're just going to rock. Forward and back. Right? All right. And if you're feeling really brave, you can close your eyes and let your head bob back and forth. And while you're doing that movement, I just want you to make note of how it feels. Don't worry, nobody looks silly. No. Right. Please stop. Please know your limits. If you're not feeling well, just stop. Okay. Now, let's stand up. We're going to do a slightly different movement. again, this time, try to take note of how you feel. So this time we're going to just shake a little bit of a wiggle. Just let your head kind of go in all different directions. And take note, how does this feel different from the rocking? Okay, everybody good? Okay, last one. Now, with caution, and only if you can, I want you to spin on an axis. So turn around. Take note of how this feels. I can't do it for very long. Woof. If you need to stop, stop. Yeah, Emily, have a seat. Okay, be careful. Okay, take a breath. And out. Okay, and have a seat. What was the difference that you could feel between the movements? Did you notice any difference?
Wait a second, I need to keep giving conscious effort. With rocking in my chair, I can simply get it going.
Yeah.
And it's automatic. Also, spinning on where I am, that's the same.
Yeah.
But moving about in erratic ways, I need to think about.
Okay, all right, so you're even thinking not about how it felt in your level of arousal or alertness, but also how you planned the movement was different for you.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting, yeah.
The second one for me didn't really take any balancing. First one, like,
Uh-huh.
okay, how far do I go forward or back?
Yeah.
And of course, so you turn it like this.
Yeah.
But that this is, yeah, you're in one place, but things are moving.
Yeah. Did that feel different to you in your body for your level of alertness or arousal at all?
Yeah, that one didn't feel fun.
That felt fun?
Yeah.
The jolty?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Typically, you had something to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that when you stand up, I felt like a little bit more scared because there is a bigger chance of falling than when you're doing it sitting down.
Okay.
So your balance is a lot more thrown off when you're standing up.
Yeah. Sure. Okay, so there's a little bit more nervousness or anxiety there. Yeah. Yeah. Or cautiousness. Yeah. So typically rocking, linear same movement is quite calming to the nervous system, right? And of course, that's why we rock babies and everything else. And then our nervous systems mature and develop and become adults. And then what happens when we do rocking movement? Sometimes it can make us quite ill. Right, so it depends on where you are in your development, and most particularly rotary movement. And the reason why rotary movement can be so triggering for people is that the vestibular system is working really in concert with the interoceptive system, and this is why it can make you feel quite nauseous quite quickly. Then the start-stop movement is quite alerting. So normally, if we're thinking of like brain breaks in class, we want to get up, we want to jiggle, we want to move, we want to kind of do not same movement. The same sort of rocky movement is quite calming. So you can use that movement for different options depending on what you're looking for. Yeah. Any questions? So far so good, everybody's all right? The thing about vestibular movement is that it can be super powerful and you can have quite negative effects long after the movement. So you do have to be mindful about ever asking anybody to spin, especially when you are an adult age. Yeah, so you have nervous systems that are mature and developed. So your brains are not craving in the same way the sensation as a child would be, which is why you can see children on the playground spinning round and round and round and never get sick, right? And then 30 years later, they're at an amusement park and then they can't tolerate it anymore, right? So your system can definitely change. I don't know if you're like this, but I know I have changed dramatically. The thought of a roller coaster now, just like, even that little bit of spinning I did there, that's enough for me. When I was younger, I couldn't get enough. Couldn't get enough, right? Loved it. But yeah, my nervous system is in a different place now. Yeah, so we do change. Okay, I'm just conscious of time. I think I'm going way over.
Is that also a thing of habit? Let's say
you're an adult and you start doing, I don't know, some kind of sport or whatever, over time you could get back into a different sensory need, vestibular need.
We know that people have sensory processing dysfunctions across the lifespan, and we're seeing more and more of it in the older age groups, in dementia care and with Alzheimer's. And so the idea too is that there's so much less movement in that population that then they're becoming much more sensitive to it. Whereas if we're practicing it more, then it's not diminishing as much. So yeah, if, for instance, if you have a child and suddenly you get a trampoline in your back garden and you haven't jumped on a trampoline in 20 years and you start jumping on it every day for a few minutes, you'll probably start to tolerate it a little bit better. It might be a nice regulating activity for you, but if you weren't doing that because it wasn't in your experience, then you might then the first time or the first few times be quite sensitive to it. Yeah, or you go to the trampoline park with your kid for the birthday party and you can't handle it. But you think, I used to love trampolines, what's going on? Right, your nervous system is just out of practice. Yeah, does that make sense? And again, not a dysfunction, right? Not a dysfunction unless it becomes interfering with, your interactions, your social life, your work. Yeah. So this is again just to talk about the process and how it really underlines development. And so, of course, this pertains to pediatric populations, but what we're trying to do with our students is all this high-level, work. And if they haven't had really solid foundations of their sensory processing all along their development, then all of these high-level skills are going to be difficult to achieve. They're probably struggling at one point in their life with some of these. So it's always to remember to come back to them. This is our rationale. Why are we trying to make people more aware of their own individual sensory processing and if it might be dysfunctioned?
But then can it be compensated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so why might somebody have a sensory dysfunction in the first place?
Understimulation.
Yeah, so lack of opportunities. So if we think of our refugee families, all of these families where children's development has been completely, eradicated. They haven't had the opportunity for play, for toys, for experience, plus the trauma on top of that. Yeah. So lack of opportunity. What else might affect typical, regular sensory integration?
An injury.
An injury, an illness. Yep. Any kind of trauma, really, right? Yep. Also, of course, any neurodisability is going to affect it. Yeah, if you do have more problems in this area or not. Yeah. But I think lack of opportunity is still a really good point. I used to have a lot of kids come into clinic and they couldn't ride a bike. And I would say to mom, okay, how much have you practiced? And they'd say, well, he doesn't have a bike. I'd say, well, okay, we need to get a bike. So I think, right, there's certain things that certain kids just aren't motivated to do, and then if they're not going to practice it, then it doesn't mean it's dysfunctional. It's just not for them, right? Yeah. Okay.
It's a very not Dutch situation.
Okay. Yeah, it wouldn't happen here. So typically when we're talking about it being a disorder, it tends to fall into these three groups. So as you were saying earlier, rightfully, you can have sensory modulation issues where you have this hypo or hyper reaction to things. So that's like an overreaction or an underreaction. And then you can have discrimination issues, which also fall into more praxic kind of areas. And when we're talking about prevalence, sorry, this is a very wordy slide, but the main takeaway is just that the interesting thing about sensory processing disorder is it's not known as a standalone diagnosis at the moment. It didn't make it into the DSM-5 or the ICD-10. However, within the DSM-5 for diagnostics for autism, it does now include this hyper and hypoactivity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. And so there's also been far more research coming out in regards to other neurodivergent conditions like ADHD, and it's in typical populations, we are seeing it about 10 to 20%, and in atypical, like your developmental conditions, it's close to 90%. So those children really are presenting with lots of sensory processing difficulties, but we are seeing it across the lifespan. It's a little bit harder to estimate the population within the adult population, estimate the prevalence, as we have all these neurodivergent children who grow into adults, but then we have to take into account other environmental factors and other things that are influencing that. But we do have studies that are showing, neuroimaging studies now that are showing us that we are seeing it across the neurotypical population of adults and also our neurodivergent adults. So it's something that's quite much more common than maybe we would have suspected, and also really comorbid with those neurodevelopmental conditions as well.
So can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
So what is your opinion on, so I hear you also talk about neurotypical, neurodivergent, etc., like discrete categories. On the other hand, the nervous system, as you also say, is very plastic, you can learn. We heard about as special rules for neurodivergence, where it's more quiet, etc. Is that a good development, you feel? So are we helping neurodivergent people by reinforcing, and so I cannot take lights, I'm going to sit in a dark room, or I help you by getting you more used to taking on light, and therefore take away part of the issue that you have. But how do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's serving the needs of all students, because it helps. Those types of spaces are helping everybody to find that just right level of arousal, right? And all of us have under arousal, over arousal, and so certain times of the day or the year, if we're studying, or students are studying, or if we, of course, certain periods are so much harder for us, we will notice that we're probably, if we're more tired, our arousal is affected. So we may have times where a space like that, or controlling for things like that, helps us to be more, to achieve what we're trying to achieve, to be able to be successful in work. So I know in a shared office, if I'm run down, I need to always have my ear-blocking earphones on, because I can't really tolerate my colleagues speaking. And in other times when I'm feeling more modulated, it doesn't bother me too much. So I think we're already doing that, within our, and hopefully we can do more of that, where everyone's needs are being met. But I think that comes more with everybody having a more of an individual awareness of their own sensory integration, so that then if they needed to use the headphones or the sensory room or work from home, that adaptation is available.
But it's a very different story, right? So that's the same underlying the universal design for learning that I like to. It's taking away boundaries for everybody, not making up for a particular group.
No. Yeah.
But that's not the story that I often hear, because the story that is being told is we get this room because of neurodivergent students, which is a very different. Then you say it's good for everybody, which I agree.
Yeah.
Also for me, I'm probably neurotypical, right? But we're going to build a room for neurodivergent people, because they need it, which is sort of putting a label on it. So I have you understand the sort of, it's a different type of, I find your story much more positive.
Yeah, the rationale from our perspective is not that, and also I think maybe because I come from a profession that doesn't focus on diagnosis, so
exactly.
to us and to most allied health professionals, you're trying to meet the person where they're at, right? And so if that helps to engage them with education, if that helps them to be more modulated to attend class, to me that's beneficial. I don't really see it as meeting a niche for a particular population. I think it serves the whole.
Yeah, so I think that's for a teacher that's the same.
Yeah.
But I think that's why I also don't like the disability office. Like if you go there, you have a disability, right? It's immediately the labeling, which I don't think is necessarily a positive thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's how we frame it, right, and how we market it, and how we share it to the rest of the uni, probably. And we do need to be mindful about, I think, the terminology we use, and also, the accessibility. Yeah, good point. Yeah. Okay, so I'm done, right? I have so much stuff to share with you, but I think what's after this? How much time do I really have?
technically 5 minutes,
Yeah.
but maybe 10.
Okay.
It depends, because she needs to go a bit early.
Yeah. Well, I was, the next few slides, maybe I can put them on the network. I just wanted to give you a glimpse of what it's like to live with sensory processing problems or condition. And this is a non-diagnosed child, and it's just a 3-minute clip, so I'll maybe put it on the network. People can watch that. This is a really nice video about a BBC presenter. His name's Chris Packham, who is autistic, and he's talking about his own sensory experiences, and he goes into a London market and what it's like for him to be, of course, he has a profession, he's on television, he's a functional adult, but he has to do certain things in order to cope with those environments that, for him, it's very difficult. So that's another video. And then the last video I had was about this man, Ian, who had an infection 20 years ago that attacked his nervous system, particularly just his sensory nerves. And so he now lives with no proprioception. And so what that looks like, maybe that one will be nice to watch. I'll just show you a few minutes of that. And then if we have time, what I did bring for you is just to give you an idea of maybe your own, a little bit of a self-assessment. I have a sensory motor preference checklist for adults. And what I was going to do was get you to fill it out together. And you just sort of look at each system and you put an arrow up if you think that this thing helps you increase your state of alertness, or an arrow down if you think it helps you decrease your state of alertness. And it's just a nice little self-reflection tool that you can do on your own. So that was the next little bit. And then I just had some toys and some play next door. But I'll just show you this video. I think this is probably the most interesting one.
Proprioception, never even heard of it, so how I lost it I don't know. The complete, well, hey, what's that? Very scary stuff. I was working in Jersey about 30 years ago as a butcher. Got what I thought was flu, and gradually got weaker and weaker and weaker, and was eventually taken into hospital. I woke up the following morning with no ability to control movement. I still had movement. I could move an arm and I could move a leg, but I had no very fine control over that. The consequences were that I couldn't control my body without looking at what was happening. It wasn't for some time that I found that key, that I had to associate vision with picking up feedback.
Ian is one of fewer than 15 people in the world who have no proprioception. He has no sense of touch below the neck, and he's unable to sense where his limbs are or how they're moving. With the help of neurophysiologist Jonathan Cole, he's become the only sufferer from this rare condition to regain his mobility.
Ian has lost this odd thing called proprioception, which is the sensation of movement and position sense. So that if he doesn't look at an arm, he doesn't know where it is.
When you stand and when you dance, you don't necessarily think about where exactly am I in time and space. I have to think about all the processes that go on behind that, developing the movement. Am I safe? I'm in the right position.
And then slowly he realised if he looked at a moving part and then thought and willed it to move, he could control that movement.
It took me an awful long time to learn just to stand. And I even say that today, one of the toughest things that I have to do is to stand perfectly still. It was very, very difficult. To learn the concept that if you put an arm out, you'd go that way. That's what things do. So I had to lean slightly that way. And they tried to use mirrors, which you use as a dancing field. And I tried that, but I just couldn't work it all together quickly enough in my head. So I very quickly gave up the mirrors and just concentrated on looking down. Which is why I walk in the way that I do, which is inclined forward and looking down, so I can catch my whole body, so I can monitor and control and look at what's happening.
You're literally dependent on being able to see your foot so that you know it's done the right thing.
When you're walking down the road, you don't think about every step that you're taking. I do, otherwise I lose touch with where things are. I mean, when we were walking over the Millennium Bridge earlier, I had to stop with my view, rather than just sort of like glance up as I was walking along. Because to glance up, I've taken the feedback that I require away.
So if you close your eyes,
if I was to close my eyes, I'd stay in this position. That's quite an easy thing to do, but freeze certain muscles and freeze into a posture. But if we go back the 25 years or so when I was first to say, if I was to close my eyes for more than a few seconds, I'd fall over. I hadn't learned these strategies of freezing the tummy muscles.
I think I'm understanding what you physically have to go through, but what is the neurological explanation for what he is going through?
There are peripheral nerves that go to the skin, go to the muscles, go to the joints. And some of those are movement nerves, so when they fire, bits of you move, and some are sensation nerves. In Ian, he had an infection, and he raised an antibody which actually attacked the nerve cells and wiped them out. Just the sensory nerves convey touch, movement and position sense.
So you can send messages to your body in exactly the same way as me, but you don't get the message back which tells you what you've done.
Yeah, I don't get the acknowledgement saying, yeah, that's right, you got it right, and I now move on to the next stage.
So, not particularly quite fascinating, obviously, because he's one of very few who have ever got their mobility back. But yeah, it's just one perspective. The other perspective of the BBC presenter is talking more about the modulation side of things. So yeah, I'll share that on on our site. And the last little bit of our slide is really just looking at recent evidence-based for conditions and how sensory dysfunctions are linked to so many other mental health presentations. Also looking at studies where teachers are using rhythm and movement in the classroom to help with self-regulation, using sensory processing differences, understanding sensory processing differences in post-traumatic stress disorder patients, looking again at the ADHD population and these differences that are impacting them, looking at a study of older adults in the US and how the sensory environment is really influencing their visual processing along with their olfactory processing. So they found that this had a real influence with older adults. And the last one here is, well, I think it's shot to the back. And then we were going to walk through the self-assessment that I've just handed out for you. And the last little bit was just some of the strategies then, if you find when you do your self-assessment that certain movements are quite alerting for you, or certain smells are quite calming for you, then these are sort of some of the strategies that you can use and some equipment that you can use. So maybe if we have a little break in between presentations or something, you can go and experience some of the equipment in the other room. I've got some weighted items, some wrist weights, a weighted vest, a bear huggy vest, these types of things that are for people who are seeking proprioception in order to calm or to modulate. I have lots of different smells that you can smell and see which one you prefer, whether you find certain smells alerting or calming or irritating, they can be also. I also have lots of tactile toys, squidgy things, and of course then there's lots of movement apparatus, which I don't always have to hand, but in clinic we'd have swings and different things like this. But yeah, there's lots of different things, headphones, air blocking headphones, these types of things that you can have a little trial and a little play with over there. So I think that's the end of all the time I have for you today. Thank you so much for your attention. Please stay sensory aware.
We can do this, so after the wine tasting, if you want to. You can come back
That will be fun.
and try this, because,
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Careful.
Yeah.
Where are you coming up here? There? Is that your place? Your spot?
And now our colleague from Maras is the one who will come up and show what Maras has been doing with the senses, and also how they've been working with students to synchronize. So I'll let you explain. Here's
Sorry, I'll just collect my little my little guys. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea. It's so great. You give such a strong message, Andrea, in your presentation on why it's just a normal asset that we should train our senses, not only as child or elderly, but through our whole lives we should train our senses, right? So I'm here to tell a little bit how Maastricht, House for Contemporary Culture, is lured into this project. Well, that starts, I think, 2017. That was when we were talking. I was starting to work at Maastricht, and our director, Valentijn Bijvank, already noticed, was in this network with of how you, why you should train the senses. And he said, well, who train their senses all the time? Huh? We all do that. We all use our senses in our profession. But who are especially doing that? And he said, yeah, these are the artists. Artists use their body, they use painting tools, they use dancing as their body is their material, actually. So they use their senses a lot, and we could learn from that. So let's dive into that direction as a house for contemporary culture. Look into the artistic practices and researches of artists and see how we can learn from that. So then in the education part where I came in, because I'm head of the education at this Maastricht House for Contemporary Culture, I was looking at these artistic practices and thinking like, wow, these are such a rich material to use in education settings. So, so what can you expect from Maastricht when you enter the building? You step into a narrative of an artist, and at the moment it's a Peruvian artist, Arturo, talking about spirits, but you are into immersive experience. So when students enter our building, they are not receiving any explanation. We ask them to undergo and to find their bodies into this space and reflect on what is doing that. So that's one part. So the immersive environment that triggers senses, that pops up ideas, that gives perceivings, that sometimes also gives emotions, strong emotions. We have heard that during the day also, and I think yes, senses trigger of course emotions, but that's why we also need to train them to be able to understand them and to be able to have a little bit of a distance between the emotional trigger and our experiences, to be able to understand them, to get an awareness to it. So that's one part. And then we work also with the students, so they are in the exhibition space, they're receiving some exercises from the artists that we've learned at Maastricht, but we also ask students to work with us. So let's go to that part. Then I shift a bit back and forth, I think. So we have the exhibition space, and we have our students that work with us. Actually, there are a lot of them right now here. Our premium students, master students, they receive a research question from Maastricht to help us research how they use their senses, how they use their bodies in their professional careers. The group that is here right now, they can elaborate a little bit on their project. The group that was doing that last year created the website, Putting Your Senses to Work at Work. So they've learned from us, they learned from the immersive exhibition space, they learned from artistic research, and then they set off, they made their own set of interview questions and went into their professional fields and started doing interviews. Where are senses hitting the professional life, and how are they using that, and why should you use, and how to learn from that? As they say, when I start my professional career, I have not talked about the senses before, but senses are a lot dealing in my professional life. When I meet colleagues, when we go to the coffee stand, how I dress in the morning, we don't talk about this. So they try to find out how that worked. So you can find on this site all the things that they find out, and going further, what's the future? Well, they have. You can find some questions up here. What professionals give back. So this is how students, also from the university, learn how senses do play an important role in their scientific lives. So that's one project. Maybe it's nice if one of you would tell what you are currently researching for Maastricht. Would you love to do that?
Yeah, of course.
Great, thank you so much.
Well, yeah, hi, we're the premium team. We're kind of made up of a lot of different professions, so the way we experience senses in our professional settings are very different. So we have physiotherapists, medical students, people studying media, psychology, business, everything. So I think it's really interesting because then we all experience senses differently in our specific environments. But I think as covered earlier, we don't always process our senses every day, specifically in our daily lives, but also in our professional lives. And after the COVID-19 pandemic, that actually became a little bit harder to do when we started to merge our working environments and our leisure environments or our home environments. So that's kind of where we're starting off from. So if you think about sitting on a beach in Malaga, but you have to join a Zoom call, and you do it on your sunbed, by the pool or by the ocean, theoretically that would be your leisure space, right? But now that you're taking that work environment into this space, is it now your workspace or is it now your leisure space? And how do you kind of separate yourself in that setting, but in two different people? Because you are two different people when you're at home and when you're at work. So yeah, we're kind of looking into that, doing a lot of literature reviews, but then also diving into working from home and speaking to nomads, so digital nomads, and how they experience the senses in leisure and workspaces. It's a very brief.
Yeah, and in about 2 months, your research will be developed into a kind of delivery. We don't know yet what the delivery is.
No.
That's the most exciting part when we ask students to do a research for us, as Roy also already mentioned. There is a frame. Well, there's a vague idea what we want to have a research on, but then the students come in and bring their own ideas. So they build up into the framework. For some it's a website, some is a booklet. We've already seen also next door there were some booklets of former years. So the group develops their project. And that's always, I find it very interesting, enthusiastic, motivating. When we talk about motivation, it's very interesting that you motivate each other. So the students motivate Mares and Mares motivates back. So that's always very nice to do. I think that's the best way of learning and growing together.
Definitely.
Into this sensory experience. Thank you. So that's what students also do at Mares. So we provide them with a space, with a framework, and they find their own niche in what they want to do. Then another project that Mares has is called Extended. I'm not sure if it's on this part here. Oh, we can find it on the education part. Extended is also, I guess, more for bachelor students, age 14 to 20. They work together with an artist from the Jan van Eyck and with Mares. And they get a challenge from the artist and they try to come up with their own project again. This time it's about fragrance and heritage. So how does heritage smells like? And considering your own cultural heritage. And they're going to make their own perfumes this time. So Extended is a group that also does research for us, where the university is part of this experience and working collaborative together.
How do people register for this?
You want to register?
Well, there's every 4 months an open call. And about 8 to 12 young people are asked to work with us. It's a very diverse group, deliberately age 14 till 20, 21 sometimes, because you really have a different age group and a perception on what society is within a certain topic. It's again very stimulating. Of course, the university students, they're very good in finding their theories. But then you have the VMBO student is very practical and very imaginative and blurring out what they feel and sense, feeling less ashamed of having it theoretically right. So that's interesting. That's an interesting mix. Go back to the homepage. Another thing that I've heard during this day is also about the narration of the senses. You give people words to translate their senses, be able to talk about it. But sometimes there are no words for senses, right? So you can translate one sense into the other, and I think again the art world can help you with that. Like artists do that. I've seen an exhibition also at Royce that you can create a painting, and then all of a sudden the words will come, and you can talk about the topic much better because you have the image already produced. So senses is sometimes not very verbalized already, and so you can translate one sense into the other, and that makes it communicatable. So if I would ask you to give a movement of how this day was for you, everybody will have a different kind of movement. And that's interesting because then we can talk, why did you choose for this movement? Or why did you choose for that movement or this movement? I don't know what kind of movements are coming here. So, and again, I think all these things is what you can find in the art world and how artists do their artistic research. Two more things. The invisible collection. That's why it's invisible, because it's about our perceivings of artworks. You find all kinds of small little stories of artists, students, children. Anna, you're still on there. Where people share their experience with an artwork in such a way that you as a listener are able to imagine it. That's the task. People are giving and sharing their experience. And again, it's about translating your perceivings into a kind of word and making a story out of it. So storytelling. And so I kindly ask you to, if you feel you want to participate in this, everybody is welcome to send in their own art experience. And lastly, I'd like to invite you all, because I'm also running out of time. That's easily done, yeah? When you do so much, you run out of time. So really too hungry. Lastly, I'd like to invite you all to the Training the Senses Symposium, 4th, 5th and 6th of June. Every day between 4 and 7. Two partners, which university is one partner. Here you can find all partners. Where I've been working last 3 years, apart from the senses-based learning, also to a Sense Squared, how to bring the senses back into the educational system from primary to tertiary development. And these partners from all of Europe, they're all working on that. And they can find all their ways of tools. So if you want to enrich in your toolbox, you should join 1, 2 or 3 days. The program is now on the website, so I invite you all to come. It's a free event, and you find people to talk about this topic. So yeah, that is what Malaise as a House for Contemporary Culture is doing in this project. And again, I think my main drawback I would love to give you is that you, with this research of senses-based learning, you should look towards the artwork world and extract the way how artists are doing research into your educational didactics as a teacher. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, there are questions.
I have two. One is when the students are working with you, are they also interviewing, talking with artists, or I mean, because you say they develop their own project, but I was wondering if learning from artists means
talking with them. Yes. Well, we have the myself and the director, Van den Bijvel, is the coach for the students, and then their artists are there. They're able to talk with them and follow workshops, but they also often have their own network of artists, so we stimulate them to do the interviews with them as well. Yeah.
And the second, quickly, all of these projects, they are projects, and what happens to the projects? You know, how do they become applied somewhere, or how do you?
Yeah. Well, Maastricht is a presentation institute. We're not a museum, so our being in the world, this institute, is to set fires. So we set fires at, well, you have to laugh, Emily, but we set fires at the university in this project. So students come to us and we give them the tools. There is training going on all over the Netherlands and also in the project of the Erasmus. It's all over the Europe. What is Maastricht doing in that? So these are little fire makers to lend this. So it's a broader network. We have to be modest in this one. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Well, the thing is, because, for example, the project of last year with the work and the senses in the work, then I'm thinking, okay, I want to work in a workplace that implements these findings.
That's if I can. That has been one of the problems of our project, is that there is a shift to be done between the research and the advocacy. And that's a jump that's actually quite difficult for academics and for institutions like Maastricht to do, because we don't have the administrative structures, for example, to sustain the kind of advocacy that's necessary to change practices in the workplace, in the universities, etc. So I think at some point that's something that we need to think about also as an institution, is how do we go from, amazing experiments with super interesting results into a real change in the workplace, in the education, etc. How do we go from research to advocacy? I really think that's a really, for me now, that's the main challenge.
But there are networks saying that, and I think the awareness is growing among a bigger scale. And I think that everybody has a modest role in that to bring it as a society into that next level of working together. You know what I mean?
Yes, it's very good.
Yeah.
But it comes a lot from the students actually. More and more what I get is students that go like, why don't we have more courses like this? Or why don't we do more? And I think if the students push it, I think for us it makes it a lot easier also.
Bottom up instead of top down.
Sorry?
Bottom up instead of top down.
Actually top down doesn't seem to
work. Yeah, but I know Van den Bijvel told us also that, well, he started this whole project Training the Senses because in the Lancet was written already that people are decreasing their human skills. So human skills are lost, and I know that indeed in primary education students cannot use a scissor anymore very well. Is it a problem? Well, if they want to be a medical doctor,
Great discussion. It was okay to join the drinks for the discussion.
You still have a question?
Just for signing up for this, is it the information there on the
website?
Okay, thanks.
And also you will share all the slides with us.
Of course.
That's great, and then we will share them afterwards.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And now we slowly move towards the end. The wine part is starting. A little bit dangerous also with the sun, and if we sip on the wine with the sun on our heads. Our next presentation will be by Roberta Di Palma, and she will present our research on wine tasting with VR, a new sense of experience. So, and afterwards, after the presentation is done, we move downstairs to the Adfundum, where true tasting will take place. As of true tasting, there are also some buckets over there, I have to say, so you don't have to drink everything. If you think, okay, I like to sip, they can put everything out in the bucket. Here are also from Voyage, actually real ones. So we don't want to feed you drunk. If you'd like to empty the glass, you can. If not, so no pressure. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicole. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Roberta. As Nicole mentioned, I am a PhD student here at SBE in the Department of Marketing and Supply Chain Management, and my research focuses on the use of VR specifically within an educational context. I am also one of the co-founders of DEX Lab, which is the digital experience lab we have here at SBE, which researches and implements digital experiences from virtual reality, augmented reality, and social robots, and various service contexts, including, of course, education. Today I am here on behalf of Assistant Professor Tim Hilkin, who sends his regards but unfortunately is ill, and I will be presenting his research together with his co-authors titled Wine Tasting in Virtual Reality, a New Type of Sense-Based Learning Experience, with a question mark to find out whether or not it works. If you're interested in reading more about this specific article and all the findings, it was actually just published yesterday in the Journal of Wine Research, so feel free to check it out. So, let's start off by discussing what we mean by wine tasting in virtual reality, and to do so, I'm going to start by explaining what I don't mean. And that is what most of us probably are thinking about during the last presentations at a conference when we are imagining all the wine that we could be drinking in that moment. When is it wine o'clock? Am I having red or white tonight? Things like that. Well, that's not actually what we mean by wine tasting in virtual reality. To clearly explain what we mean, I would actually like to do a little exercise with you. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes, I'm going to tell you a scenario, and later we're going to have a little bit of conversation about how that went. So please go ahead and close your eyes and imagine the following. Transport yourself to an idyllic Italian vineyard. Picture yourself reclined among verdant hills, bathed in warm embrace of the Mediterranean sun. Feel the gentle breeze dance across your skin, carrying whispers of fragrant blooms and earthy soils. Listen closely to the harmonious symphony of rustling leaves and chirping birds. With each sip of wine, let the terroir unfold on your palate, a tapestry of flavors weaving together the essence of the enchanting landscape. Taste the sun-kissed grapes, the minerality of the soil, the timeless beauty that surrounds you in every nuanced note of that wine. And now please open your eyes. Okay.
Reality.
Reality is back. I hope I didn't lose any of you there thinking about wine too much, but the question is, how easy or how hard did you find that, to imagine that experience?
Easy.
Easy?
Yeah.
How come?
Well, I live in the south of France, so
you don't count. Did anybody find it difficult to imagine all those nuanced elements of the wine? Would you like to share how or why?
I think it was a bit too fast for me.
Fair enough.
I have to maybe sit more a bit and then I can, because it was like, oh yeah, I have to think about that.
Yeah.
So I'm more thinking, how can I reach it instead of already be there.
Yeah. Did anybody else experience this?
For me, it was easy to imagine Italy and vineyard and stuff, but then the wine, it was purely fiction to me because I have no clue. So it was very, if the picture of Italy was quite realistic, the feelings or images of those nuances of wine was purely like fantasies.
Indeed. You're probably missing some of the senses, right? The smell, the taste, the sounds that are involved in learning about the wine specifically. And indeed, that's why we believe virtual reality training could close this imagination gap by making the experience of learning about wine and becoming a sommelier much more realistic. And we wanted to start off by explaining what VR training is. And it's nothing new at UM, actually. Together with EdLab, we've been working over the last 2 years on developing a framework, which you can see here on the screen, which helps us to classify the different ways in which VR can be used as a training tool within PBL education. And we divide our this framework is within 2 axes. And the first of all, we have the skill that we're trying to train. Is it an academic skill, meaning is it something that is explicitly mentioned or taught within a course from a curriculum perspective? Or is it a professional skill, so something less implicit, more implicit that you learn through practice, such as, for example, learning how to present or communicate? On the other axis, we have user participation. Does the user being immersed in VR need to actually actively participate in something, so interactive manner, do they need to click? Or can they just passively absorb the knowledge simply by experiencing a more immersive environment? So this is how we classify VR training experiences within UM. And today we're going to talk about one that focuses more on the passive absorption of knowledge, thanks to the increased immersion that happens to the use of virtual reality. Now, to further explain, why did we choose, or why did the author team choose to focus on sommelier training? Well, from a business perspective, of course, we're at the Faculty of Business and Economics, so there's always a little bit of a business perspective. Sommeliers have a really important role when it comes to upselling within a restaurant. Research shows that if a restaurant has a sommelier at hand and somebody knowledgeable about explaining wine, they're much more likely to sell more wine during that dinner. So it's really important to have very well-trained sommeliers because they positively impact the market. Second of all, sommelier training is inherently a multisensory learning experience. Of course, normal or natural senses that are involved are smell and taste. But what about the sound or the imagination that is involved or is necessary in order to fully understand what a wine tastes like and therefore to be able to advise somebody on what kind of wine they should choose? Well, there are two mechanisms that are enabled through VR that are very important when learning about wine. The first one is called immersion, and this basically goes along with the theory of situated learning, meaning that we learn best when we are actively involved in the exact environment in which the context that we are learning about takes place. In this case, a vineyard, right? And basically it's saying that experiencing the wine's visuals and the sensory information, such as the shape and the sound of the vineyard, the look of the grapes, what everything has to do with the soil, will increase our ability to assimilate and learn more about that wine. And this is something that, as I said, VR enables. The second element that VR enables is this, what we call the social presence. And this falls under the theory of social constructivism, meaning that we learn best when we're doing it in a social environment where we are able to discuss and actively engage in the knowledge that we are learning about. In this case, being able to articulate and discuss about the wine and how it makes you feel and how to describe it in a group of people really helps with assimilating better your sommelier training. So, this leads us to the following research question. How do immersive experiences impact sommeliers' learning, and what role do immersion and social presence play in this context? To do so, two different types of VR immersive experiences were employed. On the one hand, we have a more classic VR immersive experience with a VR headset, as you can see here. This is a 3-degree fully immersive tool, which enables you to go visit whatever location on Earth that you would like to go visit. And really close to your eyes, you see these videos, which gives you the sensation of being really there. So it enables for high, what we call spatial presence, the sense that I am there in the location that I'm discussing. However, it has some limitations. Some students might be concerned with privacy, and others might be getting some motion sickness from it, because there's a difference between where you are and how your body feels. The other immersive experience that we could operate was a VR cave. Now, a VR cave is a bit newer, it's less common, and it is basically a fully immersive room where you don't need a headset anymore, but now the walls become whatever location that you're trying to go to. So it's based on projections, everything can be projected from the wall to the ceilings to the floor in order to create a really immersive experience. The positive side of this is that, of course, in comparison to traditional VR, we now enable what we call this social presence, right? So it's not anymore an individual experience, but we're now in a group of people because we are all in this shared immersive experience. And we're able to collaborate, which of course is, as I mentioned earlier, is really important when it comes to wine tasting. However, it also has its drawbacks. It's really complex to set up, incredibly expensive to set up, so you really need to evaluate the different ways in which you could use it for a university to create it and develop it for its students. Fortunately, however, the value of this virtual cave has been explored and understood by one of our partners, which was the Food Experience Lab at the Zoid Hotel Management School here in Maastricht, who have invested in a lab, VR cave, quite a few years ago, and it looks something like this. This is the exact stimuli material that was used for this project, where students were immersed in a vineyard in Emilia-Romagna in Italy, while they sipped on the wine that they were then being tested on. To give you a short glimpse of what the cave looks like, here's a quick video. Indeed, so you're able to project anything you like, including sound, including smell if you want, including all the elements to create the most realistic experience for you and your students. Is everything clear up to this point? Yeah? Are there any questions? No? Great. Then I'll move on to our experiments, or what was conducted. So this is the framework and the hypotheses that were tested. The idea was to test the comparison of the VR cave to the immersive VR goggles in order to understand which led to better perceived learning by the students, who in this case were students at the hotel management school. So it was part of their curriculum to gain sommelier knowledge. And based on the two psychological mechanisms that I discussed earlier of immersion and social presence, the cave was suspected to be better through social presence, leading to higher perceived learning. And on the other hand, the VR immersive environment was expected to lead to higher immersion, which then led to higher perceived learning, which is hypothesis 1 and 2. However, to add an extra sense, the ambient sound was also treated in this case. So in some cases, the students also heard in both the immersive experience and in the cave experience some sound that is typically associated with a vineyard, so birds chirping, winds, and all the things that make it a realistic experience. And the other 50% didn't hear any sound at all. The idea here was to understand what the effects of sounds were in terms of moderating effects, in a way that the presence versus the absence probably led to a higher immersion experience and a higher immersion experience on the top, but probably a lesser experience in the social presence, because that's where you're trying to talk to other people. So,
Roberta,
yes?
Sorry. You don't have a control treatment here, right?
No, it was 2 treatment groups.
So okay.
Indeed, yeah. No control treatment group.
And when you talk about perceived learning, can you be a little bit more precise what learning outcome you were after?
Indeed, so this is one of, I'll discuss it later also as one of the potential limitations. It was right after the treatment, a quiz was given about the facts about the wine.
Okay.
So that was
some memorization.
Exactly, some perception of on how the experience was. Okay. Indeed, there's a lot of arguments on whether that or not that is a good outcome variable in this case, but that is something for future research to potentially elaborate on.
You will experience that kind of list later on yourself as well. As my husband is also a professional sommelier, so he'll do the tasting. He also kind of a list. It's different than hotel management school as he done, as he studied as well, but that is what was done during the studies.
Yeah, perfect. Indeed, I don't have the wine, but the wine is coming.
You don't have the list, it's kind of a list which you will then see later on.
Happy to hear.
Yeah, we think we should fly a control group to Italy and see.
Do you volunteer?
You too, no?
Roberta will be in the project.
I'll come as well.
That's a surprise. The whole group is going.
Yeah.
The whole group, yeah. We can all be the control. Indeed, so...
Could I ask one more question?
Of course.
Because you said it was set in situated learning, that you learn it in the context where you apply it.
Yeah.
But the vineyard is not the place where people will drink wine and where they will use the knowledge. It's the hotel or the restaurant or... So why did you choose for a vineyard if you say the relevance is that it's the context of application?
Because the student in training needs to understand the wine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they need to understand all the nuances of the wine.
Not application, but
exactly
where the wine comes from.
Exactly, so that they can learn the wine to be a good sommelier, who then is able to translate that knowledge into the environment.
So how you describe a wine, how you describe a wine with certain things.
No, that I understood, but I was just...
Yeah. So ideally, we take all our students to every vineyard in which that wine is produced. That's a bit complicated.
No, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah.
Great. So in terms of study design, we had 109 students from the hotel management. So as I said, these were all students who were learning as part of their trajectory about wine. So the sample was indeed realistic. Ages between 18 and 27 years old, and they were all familiar with wine drinking. Which helps. So as I said, we had 50% in the VR headset, 50% in the VR cave. So it's a 200. In this case, it was a 270-degree cave. And in terms of survey, they answered questions regarding the perceived learning, the social presence, the immersion, and of course some demographics. The wine stimuli in this case was a 2021 Tavernello from, as I said, Emilia-Romagna. It looks something like this. And students were indeed able to drink it, of course, during the experience. So it was also a nice little activity for them. Good to note that all students were free to discuss, move around, as they normally would during a traditional sommelier training experience. So, what were the findings? Interesting findings were that indeed VR headsets, as predicted, increase immersion compared to the VR cave. And the other way around, caves increase social presence. So this makes sense. However, the important question here was, which of these leads to learning? And it was found that through immersion, so through these headsets versus the cave, students perceived higher learning compared to the cave. No effects were found through social presence. So the cave in this case is seen as less effective, even though it does increase the social presence. Additionally, in terms of the moderator, it was found that ambient sound actually negatively impacted immersion levels compared to what was predicted, and it had no effect on the social presence. Now, this was quite surprising, right? Which makes you question and understand does it make sense to add all these multisensory elements within a learning experience, and when should we detract? So the idea here is probably that the ambient sound, when fully immersed in an individual experience, was actually very distracting to the students, who could not fully understand and take in what the visual element that they were learning about was. So that is quite an interesting finding.
What about that? Did it happen only when they had the goggles on that the ambient was...
Indeed.
Okay.
Because no effect was found.
And then it happened somewhere over there where you focus here. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, not with the cave. Okay.
Yeah, for the cave, no effect was found. So neither positive nor negative. Yeah. The ambient didn't have any effect.
Just normal. Okay.
It might be because they were so engaged in the conversation that they maybe didn't even notice that the sound was there. So that's possible.
Was there any control over the volume of the sound? Like, was it just one level of
yes,
volume?
I believe so. As I said, I'm not the, but I believe it was the constant, yeah.
And what kind of sound was it? Like
it was chirping, just very natural, open field sounds that you would have, movement in the background of cars and things like that.
So that's where you sit in the vineyard.
Exactly. Yeah. Imagine you're in a vineyard, you would have all these elements of maybe leaves brushing around because of the wind.
Did you correct for the sort of the level of sound in a room versus immersion? So I can imagine
I'm
that
not
there's
sure. Yeah, I'm not completely sure about the difference there. I believe headphones were used connected to the headsets versus just a sound machine in the room. But there was a control manipulation check, of course, to ensure that the sound was either perceived or not perceived. At least. So, any other questions on the findings?
So you haven't convinced them to build a VR cave?
We haven't convinced them yet. No, but
with these results you can't.
You can't. But still, the experience from students is really, really positive, right? If you imagine, if you ask them, imagine this versus being able to discuss how did you feel about that, that's a completely different discussion that you have with the students. And we see that already creates a lot of more motivation and engagement within the things that are being learned. So we don't have the evidence in this case, but that also is what we suggest in future research as well. So in terms of the implications, we have, of course, both implications for theory and for practice. In terms of theory, this was the first research study to compare the effectiveness of headsets versus cave in training, specifically for wine taste training or sommelier training. And it was able to identify unique mechanisms for each of the VR types, which offers evidence of understanding what type of experience you're trying to simulate and whether engaging with too many sensory experiences is actually positive or not. So it's really important to evaluate what you're trying to learn and whether it's a social element or not, or if your immersion is the most important element, and decide based on that which of the two immersive experiences, VR versus the cave, is the best one for your case. In terms of practice, we consider which VR type the use depending on the desired outcome, as I mentioned. So is it to increase immersion or is it to increase social presence? And it's also important to maximize the immersion by minimizing distractions, as we saw that there was this negative potential effect of ambient sound. And also adding additional sensory modalities needs to be heavily considered. In terms of future research, we propose that these effects are really interesting, especially for the sommelier training, but are there other trainings within an educational system that could benefit from either a VR, immersive VR, or a cave VR? And we invite you to question that. And also, how do the effects of this training look over time? Should we have repeated trainings? Should future research look at delayed or sequential or non-VR versus non-VR experiences to understand how it really impacts learning? And of course, we also highlight the limitation of how learning was measured, meaning right after the training, maybe prolonged exposure or waiting for a bit of time to question the students or test the students on the knowledge gained could also be beneficial to understanding the real implication and effectiveness of VR, immersive VR versus immersive cave in terms of training for sommelier. Now, that concludes my presentation. However, I still wanted to gauge your opinion and your experience. Maybe some of you have used VR within your learning before. I remember Emily did. And what do you think other areas that could benefit from these kinds of experiences are, in your opinion? And how would you go about deciding which sensory modalities would you include? Would you add the smell? Because that's something you can also do now with VR. Would you add the sound? Visual is, of course, inherently part of it, but you can add the taste, right, as we did with students having the ability to drink. So yeah, I just wanted to understand your opinions and happy to share our experiences so far if we can. Yes, please.
Yeah, we, of course, in psychology, of course, we have a really hard, a very difficult time getting live patients in. So this is, we're talking about it in the faculty as well, to be able to have simulations where you can speak to a patient and do an interview where it seems as real as you can get it without, because we have simulation patients, but having real patients is very, very difficult. So this would fill an enormous gap in the learning to have them have a more realistic experience of interviewing. Having the smell of the room, having the sense of the environment would be is really valuable.
For sure, and VR in itself is a valuable tool, but when you think about the additional benefits of artificial intelligence combined with VR, now everything is possible. So we are currently testing a tool that you were able to customize a one-on-one conversation with, and you would really be able to tell the AI, I am trying to train for an interview patient for this scenario, and then the avatar that you're communicating with is completely equipped to have that realistic conversation with you, making it much more approachable now for us educational institutions to customize these things on the spot without having to requiring software and programming skills, which was a really big barrier to entry when it came to VR just a few years ago. So I can share with you, if you're interested, different apps that would enable these kinds of conversations. Sure.
Did you ask the students if they had already been in a vineyard before?
I believe so. It was checked for
because
that. And also prior experience with VR.
Because how new is the experience,
Yeah.
you know, in the way that you experience it.
But it also truly makes a difference whether you have the students who are studying for sommelier and also the professional sommelier. So maybe it's also future research and professional sommeliers. There maybe increase even the knowledge in training.
Did you investigate the people with previous VR knowledge? If
Yeah,
they
that's
responded
always
differently than the people who had no previous.
It's quite standard for us to include that as a control within these studies because that makes a really big impact on novelty effect.
Yeah, exactly. So what did you see here?
I don't know the details of the version. I'm sorry, I don't know.
But I think that is controlled.
But that's a good question. That's a good question. I believe it's discussed in the publication. Yeah. Anything else? If not, I thank you so much for your attention. As I said, at DexLab, we try as much as possible to innovate education with these innovative technologies. And if you're interested in collaborating or learning more about how they could impact your education or do research with them, feel free to reach out. We're always open to collaborations or simply sharing what we've learned so far to help with best practices and improving the use of these technologies within UM.
Are you going to share the slides? Can you put the link to the paper?
I can. I'll put it in the first notes. Yes,
thanks.
I will do that.
We will do, Rebecca, thank you so much.
Everybody's like, you have to pay really attention to get the class in this, to hold it in this position. Eh? You put your muscles on. It already makes sure that if you do this like this, you'll notice your brain is focusing on bringing the glass to your mouth. And due to the fact that alcohol it will get less and less, but nevertheless, it means you still focus on drinking the glass. If you have a glass like this, for instance, and there will be a sharp edge on the glass, you put it on your lips, and you're instantly getting a reaction to your brain on like, oh, there's something sharp on it. People are really focused on that. So it makes a lot of sense to focus on those things as well. Just want to get you to focus on those kinds of things with all the senses. We'll get to the tasting in a short moment. No worries. What is really important about the goals of a tasting? It can be get people acquainted with the product, get to be descriptive about the product. You will try to recognize it with blindfolded, like you are going to do at the moment. Analyzing can be done as well. Quality control, really important. For a fact, when I was the manager at the brewery, I could taste the differences between all the batches of Malteser we brew. So I know instantly when it was right or there was something wrong. And you can determine something as well, like judgment in qualification, what's nicer, better, or as you will, or combination of those, obviously. You've got this form in front of you, two forms actually. One is the simple form with all the answers. I'll be gentle with you guys today. So everybody is easy. All the answers are in this one. But let's make it a little bit more difficult because there's a competition element as well. You'll see on the first page, on the first side of the left, you'll see the aromas. Those are 1 point. You can choose all the aromas you think of which are in the wine. You can fill it out in the second form. First wine, and you can fill out all the aromas you think. If you think it's got, there can be Gatsby, for instance. Always fun to notice. Maybe you saw that already. I'll explain you the Gatsby in a short moment. But if you think there's Gatsby in it, you put it on the aroma list, on the fill out form. But if it's wrong, you get 1 point in minus. So that's the fun part. You can't all just put in all the answers which are here and put them in the fill out form. You can choose what you would like to. So you can call out the grapes if you think it's a Merlot. You fill out the Merlot as well. If it's wrong again, minus points, minus 5 points. So it's an option. You don't have to fill it out. You can to make it a little bit more difficult for you. Yeah? Has everybody got the point of how to fill it out? Okay, wonderful. Then there's the countries. You can choose if it's a New World wine or Old World wine. Old is like Europe. New Worlds are Australia, New Zealand, all those kind of countries. And you can choose to double it if you're 100% sure this is the wine, this is what it's supposed to be. You can double it as well, just to make it a little bit more fun to see what happens if somebody will choose to. Yeah? So we try to do the first round.
Yeah.
Okay. Small detail as well. For the time reasons, I'll give you the 2 wines at the same time. We've got two rounds, 2 wines at the same round. You can drink them. You can put them in the baskets as well if you don't want to drink them anymore. And for instance, for a lady, if you don't want to drink wine, you can just smell and see what you can do. Help your team as well. Okay. Dat mag, ja. No. If somebody likes some more wine, so there's 50 bottles. All the same. 1, 2, 3, and 4, all the same ones.
Now you're curious, what was the difference?
First round you were drinking was I used some coloring mix. You can get it at the local grocery shop. Just simple stuff like this. I use a little bit of red ones, put it in a can, and mix it up.
That's cheating.
That's cheating, absolutely.
Imagining everything.
And the second round, I used the temperature. And I did give you a small hint of the temperature, which is really important as well. The temperature was like, I think 5 degrees higher than the ones we were out of the fridge. What happens, different kind of aromas, you start to notice them when they're very green. So the things you were supposed to answer were like everything with citrus or fruity aromas. Those were the right answers. There's a 50% put on wood. So I've saw the answer with wood and stuff like that as a right answer as well. Vanilla and cocos, due to the fact that when you put a wine on a wooden barrel, what happens? There's in every white wine you produce, there's a citrus aroma of apple, fresh apple, Granny Smith. I heard you saying as well. If you put them on wooden barrels, you'll it happens to be a malolactic process, which means the apple aromas are translated, sours are translated into milk aromas. So that's why you can say cocos, vanilla, butter if it's went too a little bit too far. But Chardonnay is always to smell Chardonnay, in which you put in wooden barrels. The wine from France, you can smell the butter. That's a good thing in this case. So you got to do with all those things. But that's what happens. I just kind of made a little bit fun with the tasting. It's 4 wines.
Was this fun for you?
Yeah, was this fun for us? Yes. I hope both ways. Afternoon for you as well. There's still more wines to taste and to toast, but it's all the same wine.
Yeah,
red wine is the same.
So is it, your degree is also fake then? Like
And Niels, also a great thanks to you.